The Iliad, Homer's immortal epic, first sung by wandering bards in the flickering light of ancient hearths. This is not merely a tale of war and warriors, but humanity's earliest exploration of honour, rage, love, and loss. Here gods walk among mortals, heroes face their destinies, and the very foundations of Western literature were laid. Tonight, let the ancient rhythms of this timeless story carry you into peaceful rest. If you enjoy this journey through ancient literature, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more historical content. Long before Homer sang his immortal verses, the world of the Aegean Sea pulsed with life and ambition. Bronze gleamed in the Mediterranean sun. Ships cut through azure waters carrying precious cargo between distant shores. Palace walls rose from hilltops across a landscape that would birth legends. This was Bronze Age Greece, a civilization that flourished between 1600 and 1100 BCE. The Mycenaeans, as we call them today, built their world on trade and conquest. Their massive stone fortresses dominated strategic valleys. Linear B script recorded the movement of goods and people across their realm. Chariots thundered down dusty roads while craftsmen shaped metal and clay in palace workshops. The Mycenaean palaces were centres of power and culture. Pylos commanded the western coast. Tyrans guarded the approach to the Argolid plain. Mycenae itself, with its famous Lion Gate, controlled the routes between northern and southern Greece. These were not simple fortresses. They housed complex administrative systems. Scribes tracked livestock, land holdings, and tribute payments with meticulous care. Trade networks stretched across the known world. Mycenaean pottery has been found in Egypt and the Levant. Amber from the Baltic reached Greek workshops. Gold from Anatolia adorned noble graves. The Mediterranean had become a highway connecting distant civilizations. Greek merchants established trading posts throughout the eastern Mediterranean. They competed with Phoenicians, Egyptians, and other maritime peoples for profitable routes. Archaeological evidence reveals the sophistication of this Bronze Age world. Heinrich Schliemann, the German businessman turned archaeologist, first glimpsed its reality in the 1870s. His excavations at Troy and Mycenae unveiled golden death masks and massive fortification walls. Later archaeologists refined his methods. They revealed the true complexity of late Bronze Age society. Modern excavations have transformed our understanding even further. Carl Blegen's work at Troy in the 1930s identified multiple layers of destruction and rebuilding. Recent excavations by Manfred Kaufmann expanded our knowledge of Troy's size and importance. The city was far larger than previously imagined. It controlled the vital sea route between Europe and Asia. Troy occupied a position of extraordinary strategic importance. The ancient city, known to the Hittites as Wilusa, commanded the entrance to the Dardanelles. Ships travelling between the Black Sea and Mediterranean passed beneath its walls. The prevailing winds and currents often forced vessels to wait for favourable conditions. Troy's rulers could extract tolls from this maritime traffic. They grew wealthy from controlling this choke point of ancient trade. The archaeological record shows repeated destructions and rebuildings at Troy. Troy 6, dating to around 1700–1300 BCE, was a prosperous city with impressive fortifications. Its successor, Troy 7 was destroyed around 1180 BCE. This date falls within the traditional time frame of the Trojan War. Whether this destruction resulted from Greek conquest, civil conflict, or natural disaster remains debated. Yet the Bronze Age world that produced these archaeological layers was real. It was a time of palace civilizations and international diplomacy. Kings corresponded across vast distances. Princesses travelled between courts to cement political alliances. Warriors fought with bronze weapons and rode in horse-drawn chariots. This was the historical foundation upon which Homer would build his epic tale of gods and heroes, love and war, honour and revenge. Above this Bronze Age world of palaces and trade routes, the Greeks imagined another realm entirely. Mount Olympus rose beyond mortal sight. Its peaks disappeared into clouds where immortal beings shaped the destinies of men. The gods lived much like earthly kings and queens. They held court, formed alliances, and nursed ancient grudges that echoed through generations. Zeus ruled this divine hierarchy with an iron fist wrapped in thunder. He had overthrown his father Kronos just as Kronos had defeated his own father before him. The cycle of divine succession mirrored the political upheavals that swept through mortal kingdoms. Zeus commanded lightning and storm. His word became cosmic law. Yet even the king of gods faced constraints that mortals could barely comprehend. Fate, the Greeks believed, stood above even Zeus himself. The fates spun threads of destiny that no god could break. When mortals died, they fulfilled patterns woven before their birth. Zeus might delay death, but he could not prevent it entirely. This tension between divine will and cosmic necessity runs through every page of the Iliad. Heroes appeal to gods for aid while accepting that their ultimate fate remains sealed. Hera, Zeus's wife and sister, commanded marriage and family relationships. Her jealousy towards Zeus's countless lovers created endless complications for mortal heroes. Athena embodied wisdom and strategic warfare. She favoured clever heroes like Odysseus, who combined courage with cunning. Her power could topple kingdoms when she chose to exercise it fully. Apollo brought plague and healing, music and prophecy. His silver bow could strike down armies with disease or single warriors with golden arrows. Artemis, his twin sister, governed the hunt and protected young maidens. Poseidon commanded the sea and earthquakes. His trident could calm waters or shatter coastal cities. Ares personified the brutality of warfare. Even other gods found his bloodlust disturbing. These gods maintained complex relationships with mortal humans. They could appear in human form to test hospitality or offer guidance. Divine favor brought victory in battle, success in love, and prosperity in peace. Divine wrath meant plague, defeat, and destruction. Heroes learned to read signs of divine displeasure in the flight of birds, the patterns of sacrificial smoke, and the dreams that visited their sleep. Greek religious practice reflected these divine relationships throughout daily life. Temples housed cult statues where gods supposedly dwelt. Priests and priestesses maintained sacred fires and performed daily rituals. Festivals celebrated specific gods with processions, sacrifices, and athletic competitions. The Olympic Games honored Zeus himself. These practices created a continuous dialogue between mortal and divine realms. Yet the gods remained fundamentally alien despite their human-like emotions. They experienced neither death nor lasting consequence for their actions. A god might suffer temporary pain or humiliation, but never permanent loss. This immortal perspective made them both fascinating and terrifying to mortal observers. They could love humans intensely but discard them casually when divine interests shifted elsewhere. The Iliad presents this divine world with remarkable psychological sophistication. Gods scheme against each other using mortal conflicts as their playing field. They experience genuine grief when favourite heroes die. They feel wounded pride when humans ignore their commands. Yet they also display petty jealousies and cruel indifference that shock human sensibilities. Homer's gods inhabit a universe where power and justice do not always align. Zeus may be cosmic king, but he cannot save every hero he favours. Divine intervention can prolong conflicts rather than resolve them cleanly. The gods themselves become trapped by the very cosmic order they supposedly control. This divine complexity gives the Iliad much of its tragic depth and enduring fascination. Within this world of capricious gods and inexorable fate, mortal heroes lived by a code that defined their entire existence. Honour or time in ancient Greek formed the cornerstone of heroic identity. A hero's honour depended not on private virtue but on public recognition. Others had to acknowledge his excellence for it to possess meaning. This external validation created a social system where reputation mattered more than life itself. Glory or kleos represented the immortal fame that heroes pursued through great deeds. Mortal life was brief, but glorious deeds could live forever in the songs of bards. Heroes chose dangerous paths specifically to win this eternal remembrance. They preferred a short life crowned with glory to a long existence forgotten by posterity. Achilles faces this choice directly in the Iliad. He can live quietly and die unknown, or fight brilliantly and achieve immortal fame. The warrior's duty extended beyond personal achievement to family and community honour. A hero inherited obligations from his ancestors. He must surpass their deeds or bring shame on their memory. Young warriors learned to fear disgrace more than death itself. Cowardice stained not only the individual but his entire lineage. Battle offered the supreme test of heroic worth. This shame culture created enormous psychological pressure on its participants. Heroes constantly measured themselves against their peers and predecessors. They competed for recognition in council debates as fiercely as on battlefields. Status required continuous validation through word and deed. A hero who ceased to excel began to decline in social estimation. Death in battle, when faced courageously, confirmed rather than ended heroic status. The manner of dying mattered as much as the fact of death itself. Heroes who fought to their last breath achieved a different kind of immortality than those who fled or surrendered. Their deaths became models for future generations to emulate. The Iliad shows us heroes consciously crafting their deaths as final statements about their values and identity. Yet the heroic code extended beyond warfare into social relationships. Guest friendship, or xenia, bound hosts and visitors in sacred reciprocal obligations. A host must welcome strangers, provide food and shelter, and protect them from harm. Guests must respect their host's property and honor their family. These bonds could last for generations, creating networks of mutual obligation across the Mediterranean world. Xenia relationships often transcended ethnic and political boundaries. Greek heroes might claim guest friendship with Trojan princes based on their father's connections. These personal bonds created moral complications during warfare. How could a hero kill someone who had shared his family's table? The Iliad explores these tensions between personal loyalty and military duty throughout its narrative. Gift-giving reinforced heroic relationships and demonstrated status. Valuable objects circulated among heroes as tokens of respect, friendship, or alliance. A hero's possessions told the story of his achievements and relationships. Armor passed from father to son carried the weight of ancestral glory. Gifts from gods or famous mortals elevated their recipient's social standing. The pursuit of honor and glory created both heroic greatness and tragic destruction. Heroes accomplished extraordinary feats that inspired awe across centuries. They also generated conflicts that devastated communities and destroyed innocent lives. The heroic code demanded excellence but offered no guarantee of happiness or justice. It created magnificent individuals who often proved unable to live peacefully with their peers or themselves. Long before Agamemnon led the Greeks to Troy, his family bore a curse that stretched back through generations of bloodshed and divine retribution. The house of Atreus carried guilt that no amount of heroic glory could cleanse. Their story begins with Tantalus, Agamemnon's great-grandfather, who committed crimes so heinous that they shocked even the immoral gods of Olympus. Tantalus enjoyed unique privileges among mortals. The gods welcomed him to their table as an honored guest. He shared their divine food and heard their secret plans. But this intimacy with immortal beings corrupted rather than elevated his nature. Tantalus began to believe he could deceive the gods themselves. His arrogance led him to commit an unthinkable act of hospitality violated. When the gods visited Tantalus for a feast, he served them the flesh of his own son Pelops. He wanted to test whether divine omniscience was real or merely claimed. Could the gods detect human flesh disguised as animal meat? The experiment failed catastrophically. The gods immediately recognized the abomination placed before them. Only Demeter, distracted by grief for her daughter Persephone, accidentally consumed part of Pelops's shoulder. Divine punishment followed swiftly. Tantalus found himself condemned to eternal torment in Tartarus. He stood in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink. Fruit trees hung branches within reach, but they withdrew when he tried to grasp them. Eternal hunger and thirst became his fate. Meanwhile, the gods restored Pelops to life, replacing his consumed shoulder with gleaming ivory. Pelops grew to manhood bearing this visible sign of his family's cursed nature. He won the hand of Hippodamia through a chariot race that involved deadly deception. Her father, King Oenomaus, had killed 13 previous suitors in racing contests. Pelops bribed the king's charioteer to sabotage his master's vehicle. Oenomaus died in the resulting crash, but his dying curse added new guilt to the family legacy. The curse manifested most dramatically in the next generation through the rivalry between Pelops' sons, Atreus and Thyestes. These brothers competed for the throne of Mycenae with a savagery that recalled their grandfather's crimes. Thyestes seduced Atreus' wife and stole the golden ram that symbolized royal authority. Atreus' revenge surpassed even Tantalus's original sin in its calculated cruelty. Atreus pretended to reconcile with his brother. He invited Thyestes to a feast of apparent friendship and forgiveness, but the meal consisted of Thyestes' own children, killed and prepared by their uncle's hands. When Thyestes had eaten his fill, Atreus revealed the true nature of the feast. The horrified father called down curses that would echo through subsequent generations. Thyestes' surviving son Aegisthus eventually murdered Atreus in revenge. The cycle of violence continued when Atreus' sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus, reclaimed their father's throne. They seem to have escaped the family curse through exile and eventual restoration. Agamemnon became the most powerful king in Greece. Menelaus married Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Yet the curse remained active beneath the surface of their success. Agamemnon would sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia to obtain favourable winds for Troy. Menelaus would lose his wife to a Trojan prince, sparking the greatest war of the heroic age. The expedition to recover Helen would drain Greece's manpower and resources. Victory, when it finally came, would bring new disasters in its wake. The curse operated through the characters' own choices rather than external compulsion. Each generation chose violence, deception, and revenge when other options remained available. The curse did not force their hands, but it created patterns of thinking and reacting that made destructive choices seem inevitable. The House of Atreus could not escape its past because its members continued to recreate that past through their own actions. On the slopes of Mount Ida, above the city that would one day burn, a young shepherd tended his flocks in peaceful ignorance of his royal birth. Paris, second son of King Priam of Troy, had been exposed as an infant because of a prophecy. His mother Hecuba dreamed she would bear a firebrand that would destroy their city. The royal couple commanded their son's death, but compassionate servants left him on the mountainside instead. Shepherds found the child and raised him as their own. 20 years later, this same shepherd would make a choice that doomed 2 continents to war. The catalyst came from an unexpected source. Peleus, the mortal hero, was marrying the sea goddess Thetis in a ceremony that brought together all the powers of heaven and earth. Gods and mortals mingled in celebration of a union that would produce the greatest warrior of his age. But one goddess remained uninvited to these festivities. Eris, the goddess of discord, nursed her wounded pride over this exclusion. She crafted a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest," and rolled it into the midst of the wedding celebration. The apple came to rest between 3 goddesses. Hera, queen of heaven and protector of marriage, claimed it as her due. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, argued for her own superior beauty. Aphrodite, who embodied love and desire itself, insisted the apple belonged to her alone. The 3 goddesses' rivalry threatened to tear Olympus apart. Zeus, despite his supreme authority, refused to judge between his wife, his daughter, and his daughter-in-law. He feared the wrath of whichever goddesses he did not choose. The king of gods needed a mortal judge who would bear responsibility for this dangerous decision. His choice fell upon the handsome shepherd of Mount Ida. Hermes led the 3 goddesses to Paris in the form of a young man seeking judgment in a cattle dispute. But the goddesses revealed their true forms once they stood before their chosen judge. Paris found himself confronting divine beauty that no mortal eyes should witness. Each goddess promised rewards if he would grant her the golden apple. Hera offered dominion over Europe and Asia. As queen of heaven, she could make Paris the greatest king who ever lived. Armies would bow before his might. Cities would surrender at his approach. He would rule an empire stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the borders of India. Power beyond mortal imagination could be his with a single word. Athena promised wisdom and victory in war. She would make him the greatest warrior and strategist of his generation. His name would be remembered alongside the legendary heroes of old. He would win battles through cunning as much as courage. Enemies would flee at the mention of his name. Glory that poets would sing for 1,000 years awaited his decision. Aphrodite's offer seemed smaller but proved more powerful. She promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. This woman's beauty surpassed even divine loveliness. Kings and heroes competed for her hand. Whichever man possessed her would be envied by every other man who lived. Love and beauty would be his portion rather than power or fame. Paris chose Aphrodite. The young shepherd, who had never seen the courts of kings or the clash of bronze on bronze, preferred love to dominion or glory. Perhaps his pastoral upbringing made him value personal happiness over public achievement. Perhaps Aphrodite's beauty overwhelmed his judgment, or perhaps he simply chose according to his truest nature. The consequences of this choice would unfold across decades of warfare and suffering. Hera and Athena became implacable enemies of Troy and all its people. Their divine wrath would not be satisfied until the city lay in ruins and its royal family died in agony. Aphrodite would honour her promise by giving Paris the love of Helen. But love obtained through divine intervention carried its own terrible price. The woman whose beauty would launch 1,000 ships and burn the topless towers of Troy was born from Zeus's desire and divine deception. Her mother Leda, Queen of Sparta, caught the eye of the king of gods. Zeus approached her in the form of a magnificent swan, hiding his true identity behind this elegant disguise. From their union came an egg that hatched to reveal a daughter of supernatural loveliness. Helen's beauty transcended mortal standards from her earliest years. Poets struggled to describe what made her so extraordinary. Her features achieved perfect proportions that satisfied every eye. Her voice carried music that made listeners forget their own names. Her movements possessed grace that made observers believe they witnessed a goddess walking among mortals. Even her enemies would acknowledge that no living woman could match her beauty. This supernatural loveliness created problems as well as wonder. Helen attracted attention wherever she appeared. Men abandoned their duties to gaze upon her face. Women felt diminished by comparison to her radiance. Her father Tyndareus, Leda's mortal husband who raised Helen as his own daughter, realized that her marriage would determine the political balance of Greece. Every unmarried king and prince would seek her hand. Those who were rejected might unite in war against her chosen husband. Tyndareus devised a clever solution to this dilemma. He required all of Helen's suitors to swear a sacred oath before he announced his choice. They must defend whichever man he selected as Helen's husband. If anyone tried to steal her away, all the other suitors would unite to punish the thief and restore her to her rightful spouse. The oath bound the greatest heroes of Greece in mutual obligation. The suitors swore willingly, each confident he would win Helen's hand. Agamemnon came from Mycenae with gifts of gold and weapons. Ajax brought the promise of alliance from his island kingdom of Salamis. Diomedes offered the friendship of Argos and Tiryns. Odysseus, though he preferred Penelope of Ithaca, participated to maintain good relations with Sparta. Nearly every significant ruler in Greece competed for Helen's favour. Tyndareus chose Menelaus, younger brother of mighty Agamemnon. Some whispered that political calculation rather than Helen's preference determined this selection. Menelaus would inherit Sparta's throne through marriage. This arrangement strengthened the alliance between Sparta and Mycenae. It created a power bloc that could dominate southern Greece. Helen's beauty thus became a tool of dynastic politics. The marriage celebration rivaled the gods' own festivities in its magnificence. Kings and heroes gathered in Sparta to witness the union. Gifts poured in from across the Mediterranean world. Poets composed new songs praising the bride's incomparable beauty. For several years, Helen and Menelaus seemed blessed by the gods themselves. They ruled Sparta jointly and produced a daughter named Hermione, yet Helen's divine parentage and supernatural beauty marked her for an extraordinary destiny. Aphrodite had promised her to Paris as reward for his judgment. The goddess of love would not be denied her payment. When Paris arrived in Sparta as a guest of Menelaus, the oath sworn by Helen's suitors would be put to its ultimate test. Whether Helen left Sparta willingly or against her will remains one of ancient literature's great debates. Some versions depict her as Aphrodite's helpless victim, compelled by divine power to love Paris regardless of her own desires. Other accounts present her as a willing participant who chose passion over duty. Homer himself remains ambiguous about her motivation. allowing different characters to interpret her actions according to their own understanding. What cannot be disputed is the consequence of her departure from Sparta. The most beautiful woman in the world had broken the most sacred bonds of marriage and hospitality. Her husband's honour demanded satisfaction. The oath sworn by her former suitors required their military support. The stage was set for the greatest war the ancient world had ever seen. News of Helen's flight from Sparta spread across Greece like wildfire. Menelaus's messengers rode to every kingdom that had sworn the oath of Tyndareus. The red-haired king himself travelled to Mycenae to consult with his brother Agamemnon. The brothers agreed that this insult could not stand unanswered. The honour of their house and the stability of all Greek marriages depended on Helen's return. Agamemnon assumed leadership of the expedition with characteristic ambition. As the most powerful king in Greece, he naturally expected command over the unified forces, but his motives extended beyond brotherly loyalty. A successful war against Troy would establish Mycenae's dominance over all Greece. The wealth of the eastern city would flow into his treasury. His name would be remembered alongside the greatest conquerors of legend. The summons to war created complex responses throughout the Greek world. Some kings honoured their oaths eagerly, seeing opportunity in the coming conflict. Others sought to avoid the costly and dangerous expedition. Odysseus of Ithaca feigned madness, ploughing his fields with salt until Palamedes proved his sanity by threatening his infant son. Achilles, though not bound by the oath, was hidden among women by his mother Thetis, who knew the war would bring his doom. Yet the greatest heroes of Greece eventually gathered at the port of Aulis. They came for different reasons beyond their sworn obligations. Young men sought glory and adventure. Older warriors hoped to win wealth and land. Some genuinely believed in the justice of their cause. Others simply found themselves caught up in the momentum of events too large to resist. The assembly at Aulis revealed both the unity and divisions within Greek leadership. Over 1,000 ships crowded the harbour. Contingents arrived from every corner of the Greek world. The catalogue of ships, as preserved in the Iliad, records this gathering in meticulous detail. Each region contributed according to its resources and population. Each leader brought his own ambitions and fears. Calchas, the seer, read the omens and pronounced them favourable for war. The gods, he declared, supported the Greek cause. Troy would fall to their combined assault, but first the army must purify itself through appropriate sacrifice. The winds that had carried the fleet to Aulis now refused to speed them toward Troy. Calm seas trapped the expedition in harbour while soldiers grew restless and supplies ran low. Calchas revealed the cause of divine displeasure. Agamemnon had boasted that his hunting skills surpassed those of Artemis herself. The virgin goddess demanded satisfaction for this insult. Only the sacrifice of Agamemnon's eldest daughter Iphigenia would appease her wrath and release the winds. The king faced an agonizing choice between his paternal love and his royal ambitions. Agamemnon chose ambition over love. He sent word to his wife Clytemnestra that Iphigenia should come to Aulis for marriage to Achilles. The queen brought their daughter eagerly, expecting to witness a joyous wedding ceremony. Instead, she discovered her husband's deception and watched him sacrifice their child on Artemis's altar. Favourable winds filled the sails of the Greek fleet, but Clytemnestra's heart filled with hatred for her husband. The fleet that sailed from Aulis carried the flower of Greek manhood toward Troy. Homer's catalogue preserves their names and origins for posterity. Achilles led the Myrmidons from Phthia, Ajax commanded the men of Salamis, Diomedes brought warriors from Argos and Tiryns. Nestor, eldest of the heroes, contributed ships from sandy Pylos. Each contingent carried the hopes and fears of communities across the Greek world. Yet this magnificent expedition also carried the seeds of its own destruction. The sacrifice of Iphigenia had created a blood debt that would demand payment. The oath that united the Greeks in common cause would not prevent quarrels over honour and precedence. The very qualities that made them great warriors would create conflicts within their own ranks. The siege of Troy would test not only their courage against foreign enemies, but their ability to maintain unity among themselves. As the ships disappeared beyond the eastern horizon, leaving behind grieving families and empty harbours, the greatest war of the heroic age began its slow and bloody unfolding. The stage was set for 10 years of siege warfare that would transform heroes into legends and reduce a mighty city to ashen memory. 9 long years had passed since the Greek fleet first beached on Trojan shores. The siege had settled into a grinding routine of raids, skirmishes, and temporary truces. Troy's walls remained unbroken. The city's gates still defied Greek assault. Both armies had grown weary of endless warfare that brought neither decisive victory nor honourable peace. The Greek camp sprawled along the coastline like a temporary city. Black ships lay drawn up on the sandy beach. Wooden huts housed the various contingents. Smoke rose from countless cooking fires. The sounds of daily life mixed with the constant preparation for war. Yet beneath this appearance of military routine, divine anger was building toward a catastrophic eruption. Chryses, an aged priest of Apollo, approached the Greek camp under sacred protection. He carried a golden staff topped with ribbons that marked his holy office. His daughter Chrysis had been captured in a recent raid on Apollo's temple town. She now served as Agamemnon's prize of honour. The old priest brought a fortune in ransom gold to purchase his child's freedom. Chryses appeared before the assembled Greek leadership with dignity befitting his sacred role. He spread gleaming treasures at Agamemnon's feet. Golden cups caught the morning sunlight. Silver bowls reflected the watching faces of warriors. Precious stones sparkled among finely woven textiles. The priest's offering could have purchased a small kingdom. All he asked in return was his daughter's release. The other Greek commanders watched with respectful silence. Custom and piety both favoured granting the priest's request. Apollo's servants enjoyed special protection under divine and human law. The ransom offered exceeded Chrysias's value many times over. Wise kings avoided conflicts with powerful gods over trivial matters. Yet Agamemnon's pride had grown monstrous during 9 years of supreme command. The king of Mycenae rejected Chryses with brutal contempt. He threatened the old priest with violence if he returned to the Greek camp. Chryseis would remain his property until old age withered her beauty. She would serve in his palace far from her homeland and father. No amount of gold could purchase what Agamemnon claimed by right of conquest. Chryses departed in grief and anger. He walked along the shore where waves broke endlessly against the sand. His prayers rose to Apollo with the urgency of paternal desperation. The god who ruled music and prophecy also commanded the silver bow of plague. Apollo heard his faithful servant's appeal and responded with divine wrath that would shake the foundations of the Greek expedition. The plague struck the Greek camp with merciless efficiency. Apollo's invisible arrows found victims throughout the sprawling military city. Dogs and mules died first, their bodies littering the pathways between the huts. Then the disease spread to human victims. Strong warriors who had survived years of combat succumbed to fever and delirium. Funeral pyres burned day and night. The smoke of cremation darkened the sky above the camp. Healthy men avoided their sick comrades for fear of contagion. Military discipline began to crumble as entire units fell ill. The siege operations ground to a halt while the Greeks struggled with catastrophe in their own ranks. For 9 days the plague raged unchecked through the camp. On the 10th day, Achilles called an assembly to address the crisis. The greatest of Greek warriors recognized divine anger in the disease's pattern. Only a seer could reveal which god they had offended and what satisfaction would end the suffering. The assembly gathered in desperate hope of finding salvation. Calchas the seer possessed the gift of prophetic sight. He could read the will of gods in the flight of birds and the patterns of sacrificial smoke. His prophecies had guided the expedition since its beginning, yet now he trembled before speaking the truth that all suspected. Divine protection would be necessary before he dared name the cause of Apollo's wrath. Achilles pledged his protection for whatever Calchas might reveal. The son of Peleus commanded respect even from mighty Agamemnon. His Myrmidons formed the most elite unit in the Greek army. No one would dare harm a seer under Achilles' protection. Thus encouraged, Calchas spoke the truth that would shatter the expedition's unity. The plague came from Apollo's anger over Chryses' mistreatment. The god demanded his priest daughter's immediate return without ransom. Only then would the silver bow be lowered and the plague lifted from the suffering army. The seer had spoken divine will with unflinching clarity. Now the assembled commanders must decide whether to obey or continue defying heaven's mandate. Agamemnon's rage exploded like a thunderstorm breaking over mountain peaks. He accused Calchas of always prophesying disaster. The seer never brought good news or encouraged victory. His prophecies always demanded sacrifice from the expedition's leadership. Yet even in his fury, Agamemnon could not deny the plague's divine origin or ignore his army's desperate plight. The king agreed to return Chrysis to her father, but his wounded pride demanded compensation for this loss. If Apollo forced him to surrender his prize, another hero must provide a replacement. The army owed their commander appropriate honor. His sacrifice for the common good deserved recognition and reward. Achilles rose from his seat with the fluid grace of a leopard sensing prey. The greatest warrior of his generation had listened to Agamemnon's demands with growing incredulity. 9 years of shared hardship had taught him to expect arrogance from the king of Mycenae. But this demand exceeded all previous examples of royal selfishness. The army faced divine punishment, yet Agamemnon thought only of his personal compensation. The son of Peleus spoke with the dangerous quiet of controlled anger. He questioned Agamemnon's right to additional prizes when the common treasury remained empty. The Greeks had divided all their spoils from previous raids. No unclaimed treasure awaited redistribution. If Agamemnon wanted compensation, he must wait for Troy's eventual fall and the vast wealth contained within its walls. Agamemnon's response revealed the extent of his delusion and arrogance. He would take a prize from one of the other commanders. Ajax, Odysseus, or Achilles himself could surrender their prizes to satisfy their king's wounded honor. Whoever lost his prize could nurse his anger in private. The king's needs took precedence over any subordinate's claims. This threat struck at the heart of heroic society's fundamental principles. A warrior's prizes represented public recognition of his valor and achievement. They embodied his honor in tangible form. To lose them meant social humiliation and diminished status. Agamemnon proposed to strip another hero's honor to preserve his own. Such behavior violated every custom of military justice and heroic conduct. Achilles' reply cut through the assembly like a blade through silk. He reminded Agamemnon that Myrmidons had no personal quarrel with Troy. They fought for Greek honor and their commander's glory. But Agamemnon claimed the greatest share of every victory while contributing least to each battle. His cowardice was matched only by his greed for unearned prizes. The king of Mycenae responded with threats that sealed the expedition's doom. He would indeed take Briseis, Achilles' prize and beloved companion. Let the son of Peleus learn that Agamemnon ruled supreme among the Greeks. No warrior, however mighty, could challenge royal authority without consequences. The seizure would demonstrate the proper relationship between king and subject. Achilles' hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. The bronze blade whispered against its sheath as divine fury filled his mortal frame. Here stood the ultimate test of heroic restraint. Should he cut down this worthless king and face the consequences? Or should he endure this insult for the sake of the common cause? The assembly held its breath while destiny balanced on a sword's edge. Athena descended from Olympus at Hera's urgent command. The goddess of wisdom appeared to Achilles alone, invisible to other mortal eyes. Her cool touch on his shoulder checked his drawing sword. Her words offered a different path to satisfaction. If he restrained his immediate anger, greater glory would come in time. Agamemnon would pay for this insult many times over. The goddess's intervention saved the expedition from immediate collapse. Achilles released his sword and chose words as his weapon instead. His curse rang across the assembly with prophetic force. The day would come when the Greeks desperately needed his strength. They would face Hector's spear without the Myrmidons' protection. Agamemnon would tear his heart in grief for this day's folly. Achilles hurled his speaker's staff at Agamemnon's feet. The golden scepter, symbol of orderly debate, struck the ground like lightning. His terrible oath followed. The son of Peleus swore by this staff that never again would he lift a spear for Agamemnon's cause. Let the king discover what leadership meant without the army's greatest warrior. Nestor, wisest of the Greek commanders, attempted to heal this dangerous breach. The king of Pylos had lived through 3 generations of heroes. His words carried the weight of accumulated wisdom. He praised both heroes' excellence while condemning their quarrel. Unity had brought them to Troy's shores. Only unity could complete their mission and secure their return home. Yet Nestor's diplomatic wisdom could not bridge the chasm that had opened between Greece's two greatest leaders. Agamemnon's wounded pride demanded visible satisfaction. Achilles' outraged honour refused any compromise with injustice. Both heroes had revealed their essential natures in this confrontation. Neither possessed the flexibility necessary for reconciliation. The assembly dissolved without resolution. Agamemnon sent heralds to claim Briseis from Achilles' hut. The woman went unwillingly but without resistance. She understood the powerless position of war prizes in conflicts between their captors. Her grief would join the chorus of lamentation that followed heroic pride to its inevitable destination. Achilles watched his beloved's departure with the stillness of volcanic mountains before eruption. He had sworn not to fight for Agamemnon, but this oath bound him in ways the king could not imagine. The greatest warrior in the world had become a spectator to the war that needed his strength most desperately. His rage would reshape the conflict's course in ways that no mortal could foresee. Achilles walked alone along the grey sea's endless margin. Waves broke against the shore with rhythmic persistence. Salt spray caught the light like scattered diamonds. The hero's grief matched the ocean's eternal restlessness. He had lost more than a beloved companion. His honour lay trampled beneath Agamemnon's royal authority. The code that defined his existence seemed meaningless in the face of such injustice. The son of Peleus raised his hands toward heaven in desperate appeal. His voice carried across the waters like a seabird's cry. He called upon his divine mother Thetis to rise from her underwater realm. No mortal parent could help him now. Only a goddess possessed the power to redress such grievous wrong. His prayers echoed with the pain of betrayal and the hunger for vindication. Thetis heard her son's lament from her silver throne in Poseidon's palace. The sea goddess felt his anguish like a knife in her immortal heart. She rose from the ocean depths with the speed of thought itself. Foam swirled around her divine form as she materialized on the beach beside her weeping child. Her presence brought the comfort that only a mother could provide. The goddess listened while Achilles recounted his humiliation before the assembled Greek commanders. His words tumbled out like a flooding river breaking through winter ice. 9 years of faithful service had earned him nothing but insult and robbery. Agamemnon's greed had destroyed the bonds of military brotherhood. Justice seemed impossible while such a man commanded the expedition. Thetis stroked her son's hair with fingers that had touched the ocean's deepest mysteries. Her heart broke for his suffering, but she also knew the larger pattern of his fate. The choice she had revealed to him long ago was approaching its crucial moment. He could live a long quiet life in obscurity, or achieve immortal glory through early death. This quarrel might determine which path he would ultimately follow. The sea goddess promised to seek justice for her son's wrongs. She would petition Zeus himself for divine intervention. The father of gods owed her an old debt that she had never collected, once she had saved him from the other Olympians' rebellion. Now she would ask him to honor the Greeks' enemies until they recognized Achilles' true worth. Let them discover what their contempt for excellence would cost. Zeus received Thetis on Mount Olympus with evident reluctance. The king of gods understood the implications of her request. To honor the Trojans meant dishonoring his own Greek favorites. Divine politics would erupt into open conflict if he granted the sea goddess's petition, yet he could not refuse the debt he owed for his throne's preservation. The father of gods nodded his mighty head in agreement. His dark locks swept forward like storm clouds gathering over mountain peaks. This nod bound cosmic fate to Thetis's will. The Trojans would prosper until the Greeks acknowledged their need for Achilles' strength. Honor would be restored through suffering that touched every level of existence. Hera observed this divine conference with growing suspicion and anger. Zeus's queen had watched her husband's interview with the sea goddess from her golden throne. She knew that private divine business often threatened her own interests. Her questions erupted like a volcano that had contained its fires too long. What promises had Zeus made while she remained excluded from their discussion? The father of gods responded with threats that shook Olympus itself. Hera should not inquire too closely into divine decisions. Her interference had created enough problems in the past. If she persisted in challenging his authority, she would discover that even queens must respect their husband's ultimate supremacy. Divine marriage contained the same tensions that plagued mortal unions. Yet Hera's suspicions proved accurate. Zeus's promise to Thetis would reshape the war's course in ways that favoured Troy over Greece. Hector would drive the Greeks back to their ships. Fire would threaten their fleet. Many heroes would die to restore one hero's wounded honour. The cosmic balance would shift because mortal pride had disrupted military justice. Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, intervened to restore peace in heaven. He served nectar to the quarrelling divine couple while offering gentle wisdom about marital harmony. His own ugliness made him humble before beauty and power. The gods laughed at his awkward attempts to play peacemaker. Divine laughter echoed across the heavens as the sun set behind western mountains. But beneath this restored harmony, cosmic forces were already reshaping mortal destiny. Zeus's nod had set consequences in motion that would devastate the Greek expedition. Heroes would discover that divine justice operated by different rules than human understanding. The rage of one mortal had gained immortal allies who would reshape the war's course according to their own vast purposes. Dawn broke grey and cheerless over the Greek encampment. Mist rose from the sea like the breath of sleeping gods. The plague had lifted after Croesus's return, but a different sickness now infected the expedition. Achilles' withdrawal had created a wound in the army's heart that no healing could cure. The greatest warrior sat motionless beside his black ships while his comrades prepared for battle without him. Agamemnon summoned the army to assembly with deep uncertainty gnawing at his royal confidence. 9 years of siege warfare had tested every commander's resolve. The men grew homesick for wives and children left behind in distant Greece. Ships needed constant repair from winter storms and summer heat. Supplies arrived irregularly from homeland kingdoms facing their own problems. Zeus had sent the king a deceptive dream during the night's dark hours. The father of gods promised easy victory if Agamemnon attacked immediately. Troy's walls would crumble before Greek spears. Priam's treasure would fill their ships. Heroes would return home crowned with glory and laden with spoils. Yet divine dreams often concealed more than they revealed to mortal recipients. The king of Mycenae stood before his assembled forces with characteristic arrogance masking inner doubt. His speech began with complaints about the war's long duration and uncertain outcome. 9 years had passed since Helen's abduction sparked this expedition. The promised quick victory had become an endless siege that drained Greece's manpower and resources. Agamemnon proposed a test that revealed his own wavering commitment to the cause. Let the army abandon this hopeless enterprise and return home immediately. They had fought long enough for one woman's honour. Their families needed them more than foreign conquest did. Ships waited ready for departure with the morning tide. Freedom beckoned across the wine-dark sea. This speech struck the assembled warriors like lightning from a clear sky. They had endured hardship and loss for nearly a decade. The promise of home overwhelmed their military discipline and heroic aspirations. Men leaped to their feet with joyous shouts. They rushed toward the beached ships like floodwater breaking through winter dams. The expedition threatened to dissolve in spontaneous mutiny. Only Odysseus possessed the wisdom and authority to halt this stampede toward the ships. The king of Ithaca had recognized Agamemnon's test for what it was. No commander would seriously propose abandoning a decade-long siege on the verge of potential victory. Divine signs and prophetic omens all pointed toward Troy's eventual fall. This crisis required immediate action to preserve the expedition's unity. Odysseus seized the royal scepter from Agamemnon's startled hands. The golden staff carried the authority of Zeus himself, passed down through generations of rightful kings. Whoever held it commanded attention from the assembled multitude. The son of Laertes used this divine authority to restore order through persuasive rhetoric rather than royal command. His words reminded the fleeing soldiers of their sacred obligations and heroic identity. They had sworn oaths to recover Helen or die in the attempt. Their honour depended on completing what they had begun. Retreat would brand them as cowards before their enemies and families alike. Glory awaited those who persevered through temporary setbacks to final victory. Thersites, ugliest and most cynical of the Greek warriors, chose this moment to voice the common soldier's real grievances. His words carried venom distilled from years of resentment against aristocratic leadership. Why should poor men die for rich men's quarrels? Agamemnon and his noble friends gained wealth and honour while ordinary warriors faced death for uncertain rewards. The commoner's speech touched dangerous truths that threatened military hierarchy's foundations. His mockery of Agamemnon's appearance and character delighted soldiers who shared similar thoughts privately. Yet his vicious personal attacks went beyond acceptable bounds of military criticism. Such insubordination could destroy the chain of command that held armies together. Odysseus silenced Thersites with public humiliation rather than execution. He struck the ugly soldier with the royal sceptre, raising welts on his back and shoulders. The assembled army laughed at their comrade's punishment and discomfort. This demonstration of royal authority through physical force restored proper respect for military hierarchy, while avoiding the martyrdom that execution might have created. Order returned gradually to the ranks as officers restored their units' discipline. The moment of panic had passed, but its memory would haunt future councils and assemblies. The army's loyalty remained conditional on success and leadership competence. Another such crisis might shatter the expedition beyond any possibility of restoration. The armies met on the plain between Troy's walls and the Greek camp. Bronze armour gleamed in the morning sunlight. Spear points glittered like stars fallen to earth. War cries echoed across the battlefield as thousands of warriors prepared for another day of inconclusive combat. Yet today would prove different from the countless skirmishes that had preceded it. Paris strode forward from the Trojan ranks with the confidence of youth and divine favour. His beauty remained unmarred by years of warfare. Golden armour adorned his perfect form like decoration on a temple statue. He challenged any Greek champion to single combat. Let individual excellence determine the battle's outcome rather than mass slaughter of common soldiers. The Greeks responded with eager shouts. Here stood the man whose selfish passion had caused their decade of suffering. Helen's abductor finally offered himself for just punishment. Heroes competed for the honour of accepting his challenge. Ajax fingered his great spear. Diomedes tested his sword's edge. Even Odysseus considered claiming this opportunity for glory. Yet Menelaus pushed through the crowd with prior claim to satisfaction. The wronged husband had endured years of mockery and pity. Men whispered that he could not protect his own wife from a foreign seducer. His honour demanded personal vengeance against the man who had destroyed his marriage and reputation. No other Greek could rightfully claim this combat. Paris recoiled when he recognized his challenger. The sight of Menelaus's red hair and battle-scarred face reminded him of consequences he had tried to forget. Helen's former husband represented justice that could not be avoided indefinitely. Divine favour might not suffice against righteous anger armed with bronze spear and deadly skill. Hector stepped forward to shame his younger brother back into the fight. Troy's greatest defender spoke with contempt that cut deeper than enemy weapons. Paris had caused this war through his reckless passion. Now he shrank from facing its consequences like a coward hiding behind better men's courage. Such behaviour dishonoured their royal family and endangered their city's survival. This public rebuke stung Paris into accepting the challenge he had impulsively issued. Pride overcame prudence in his royal heart. He would face Menelaus in single combat despite the obvious danger. Divine protection had preserved him thus far. Aphrodite would not abandon her chosen champion in his hour of greatest need. The armies agreed to formal terms that would end the war regardless of the duel's outcome. Winner would claim Helen and all her possessions. The Trojans would return the stolen treasure that had accompanied her flight. Both sides would swear solemn oaths to accept the combat's verdict. Peace would replace war through divinely sanctioned trial by battle. Sacred rituals preceded the actual fighting. Kings from both armies met in the space between their battle lines. Wine mixed with water created libations for the earth and sky. Lambs died beneath ceremonial knives to seal divine witness to their oaths. Both sides called upon Zeus, Helios, and the rivers to punish whoever violated these sacred agreements. Helen appeared on Troy's walls to witness the combat that would determine her fate. The city's women gathered around her with curious stares and whispered comments. 9 years had passed since her arrival in Troy. Age had touched her beauty lightly, but war's weight showed in her eyes. She watched the preparations with the resignation of someone whose choices had created inescapable consequences. Priam joined his daughter-in-law on the ramparts overlooking the plain. The old king bore no resentment toward the woman whose beauty had brought war to his gates. Helen identified the Greek champions for his aging eyes. There stood mighty Agamemnon. Odysseus waited beside his Ithacan contingent. Ajax towered above his followers like a god among mortals. The formal duel began with spear casts that tested both warriors' skill and courage. Menelaus hurled his bronze-tipped weapon with all his accumulated rage. The point struck Paris's shield but could not penetrate its divine craftsmanship. The Trojan prince's return cast fell equally short of decisive effect. Both men drew swords for close combat that would end in death for one of them. Paris's blade shattered against Menelaus's helmet in the first exchange of sword strokes. Divine metalwork proved inferior to simple bronze forged by human hands. The wronged husband seized his advantage immediately. He grabbed Paris by his horsehair crest and began dragging him toward the Greek lines like a trophy of war. Aphrodite intervened at the moment of her champion's greatest peril. The goddess shrouded Paris in protective mist and transported him from the battlefield to his palace chamber. Divine power preserved him from consequences that mortal strength could not escape. Yet this rescue carried its own cost in honor and reputation. The Greeks claimed victory when their enemy vanished from the combat. Menelaus had clearly dominated the fighting before divine intervention saved Paris from deserved death. The terms of the duel required Troy's surrender and Helen's return. Justice had spoken through bronze weapons guided by righteous anger. Pandarus drew his curved bow with hands that trembled slightly in the morning light. The Lycian archer had watched the duel between Paris and Menelaus with growing excitement. Divine whispers urged him toward an action that would reshape the war's course. Athena appeared to him in disguise, promising glory if he would strike down the victorious Greek champion. The goddess's motivation stemmed from her hatred of Troy and all its people. She could not bear to see the war end with Trojan victory or negotiated peace. Her divine pride demanded the city's complete destruction. If the duel's outcome favored Troy, then the duel itself must be negated through treachery that would renew hostilities. Pandarus aimed carefully at Menelaus as the red-haired king stood triumphant on the battlefield. The arrow flew straight and true, guided by divine malice toward its target. Yet Athena's intervention proved double-edged. She deflected the arrow's path just enough to wound rather than kill the son of Atreus. A dead Menelaus would become a martyr. A wounded one would survive to demand vengeance. The bronze arrowhead pierced Menelaus's golden belt and penetrated his flesh beneath. Blood flowed from the wound like wine from a broken cup. The sight of their champion's injury ignited Greek rage that had smouldered through years of inconclusive warfare. Their enemies had violated sacred truces and divine oaths. Such treachery demanded immediate and overwhelming punishment. Agamemnon rushed to his wounded brother's side with anguish that surprised those who knew him well. Political calculation often governed the king of Mycenae's actions, but genuine familial love motivated his response to this crisis. He feared that Menelaus might die from poison or divine curse. The expedition would lose both its justification and one of its ablest commanders. The king's lament revealed strategic thinking even in personal distress. Menelaus's death would dishonor the entire Greek expedition. They would return home branded as failures who could not protect their own leaders. The bones of Greek warriors would bleach beside Trojan walls while enemies celebrated their victory. Such shame would follow their names through generations of storytelling. Machaon, the army's chief physician, examined the wound with professional skill inherited from his divine father Asclepius. The arrow had penetrated flesh but missed vital organs. No poison tainted the bronze point. Divine protection had preserved the wronged husband for future battles. Healing herbs and skilled treatment would restore him to health within days, yet the psychological damage exceeded the physical injury by far. The Trojans had proven themselves oath-breakers and treaty violators. No Greek could trust their word in future negotiations. War must continue until one side achieved complete victory over their treacherous enemies. The broken truce had eliminated any possibility of negotiated settlement. Agamemnon stalked through the ranks of his assembled army with renewed energy and purpose. The near loss of his brother had clarified his strategic thinking. He praised individual commanders and reminded them of their heroic obligations. The day's fighting would avenge this cowardly attack on their champion and leader. The king's rhetoric transformed Greek anger into focused military purpose. Warriors who had fought half-heartedly through years of siege warfare suddenly burned with righteous indignation. Their enemies had revealed their true nature through this violation of sacred oaths. Divine justice demanded punishment that would echo through future ages. Orders rang across the Greek camp as officers prepared their units for battle. Chariots rolled forward carrying noble champions. Infantry formed ranks behind their painted shields. Archers strung their bows and checked their quivers. The machinery of war began moving with deadly efficiency toward its appointed destination on the plain of Troy. Hector marshaled the Trojan forces with equal urgency and skill. He knew that Pandarus's arrow had doomed his city to continued siege. The brief hope for negotiated peace had vanished in divine manipulation and mortal folly. Now only victory or defeat remained as possible outcomes. His people's survival depended on his ability to match Greek fury with Trojan courage. The armies met in the centre of the plain like waves crashing against opposing shores. Bronze rang against bronze as spear met shield. War cries mingled with the screams of wounded men and horses. Dust rose in clouds that obscured the sun's light. The earth drank deeply of blood spilled in anger and divine manipulation. Heroes emerged from the general slaughter to win individual glory. Ajax carved a path through enemy ranks like a farmer reaping grain. Diomedes struck down Trojans with mechanical precision. Sarpedon led his Lycian allies in desperate charges that pushed Greek formations backward. The battlefield became a stage where mortal excellence competed with divine manipulation. Yet this first day of renewed warfare established patterns that would dominate the conflict's remaining years. Neither side could achieve decisive victory through single battles. The war would continue through seasons of fighting and temporary truces. Divine politics would manipulate mortal conflicts for purposes that transcended human understanding. Heroes would rise and fall while the siege stretched toward its inevitable conclusion. The son of Tydeus rose with the dawn like a god preparing for battle. Divine fire burned in Diomedes' eyes as Athena kindled his mortal frame with supernatural courage. The goddess of wisdom and warfare had chosen this young hero for extraordinary exploits. Today he would achieve deeds that mortals would remember for 1,000 generations. Athena's blessing transformed Diomedes into something more than human, yet less than divine. Flame danced around his helmet and shield like altar fire seeking heaven. His bronze spear gleamed within a light that made enemies shield their eyes. The goddess whispered battle secrets in his ear while strengthening his arm for heroic work. Pandarus, whose arrow had broken the sacred truce, became Diomedes' first victim. The Lycian archer tried desperately to bring down the approaching champion. His arrow struck the Greek's shield without effect. Divine protection turned aside mortal weapons with contemptuous ease. Diomedes' spear found its mark with devastating accuracy. The dying archer called upon Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, to avenge his death. Troy's second greatest hero after Hector responded with characteristic courage and filial duty. He lifted Pandarus's body onto his chariot and faced the rampaging Greek champion. Divine blood flowed in his veins, but even gods could not guarantee victory against Athena's chosen warrior. Diomedes hurled a massive stone that would have challenged 6 normal men to lift. The boulder struck Aeneas's hip with crushing force. Mortal bones shattered like pottery dropped on marble floors. The Trojan prince would have died instantly, but his divine mother intervened at the moment of greatest peril. Aphrodite descended from Olympus to save her beloved son. The goddess of love wrapped Aeneas in her protecting arms and began carrying him from the battlefield. Her soft hands had never known violence or pain. She understood flowers and music, not bronze weapons guided by murderous intent. Diomedes pursued the fleeing goddess with supernatural boldness that shocked both armies. Athena's blessing had removed normal mortal restraints on his actions. He could see through divine disguises and challenge immortal power directly. His bronze spear drew divine blood from Aphrodite's wrist in the first recorded wounding of an Olympian deity. Ichor flowed from the goddess's wound like liquid starlight. Divine blood differed from the red fluid that sustained mortal life. Gods experience pain but never fatal injury. Iris, messenger of the gods, transported the wounded goddess to safety, while Aeneas fell unconscious on the dusty battlefield. Apollo cast protective mist around the fallen hero's body. Even gods recognized limits to their power when other deities chose opposing sides. The divine politics of Olympus played out through mortal conflicts with increasing complexity. Diomedes continued his assault on divine forces with reckless courage that bordered on madness. He charged the golden chariot where Apollo guarded unconscious Aeneas. 3 times his spear struck the god's silver shield. On the 4th attack, Apollo's voice rang across the battlefield with cosmic authority that stopped the hero's advance. The god of prophecy and plague warned Diomedes to remember his mortal limitations. Gods and men belong to different orders of existence. No mortal should attempt to equal divine power, no matter what temporary blessings he might enjoy. Wisdom lay in recognizing appropriate boundaries rather than challenging cosmic hierarchy. Yet the day's divine interventions had only begun. Ares himself, god of warfare's brutal aspects, descended to rally the Trojan forces. His bronze armor gleamed with reflected firelight. His terrible war cry shattered human courage like hammer blows on brittle metal. Even experienced warriors fled when they recognized the presence moving among their enemies. Hector fought beside the war god with renewed confidence and deadly skill. Divine presence multiplied his natural abilities. His spear found marks that human vision could never have detected. Trojan morale soared as their enemies fell back toward their beached ships. Victory seemed within reach for the first time in years. Athena could not permit her brother's intervention to go unanswered. She transported Diomedes in her divine chariot to face Ares directly. The goddess guided her champion spear with perfect accuracy toward the war god's bronze-plated stomach. Divine weapon met divine flesh in combat that shook earth and heaven. Ars's scream of pain and rage echoed like thunder across the Trojan plain. The war god fled to Olympus, trailing complaints about mortal insolence and sisters' treachery. His departure left Hector fighting without divine assistance against enemies blessed by superior wisdom. The tide of battle shifted again, as divine politics trumped mortal courage. Zeus received his wounded son with paternal irritation rather than sympathy. The father of gods had little patience for Ares' endless appetite for destruction and chaos. Wars served divine purposes, but the war god himself remained a necessary evil rather than a beloved child. His wounds would heal, but his pride would smart longer than his flesh. The battle swirled around them like leaves caught in autumn wind. Dust clouds rose from countless feet and chariot wheels. Bronze weapons caught occasional gleams of sunlight through the haze. Individual combats formed and dissolved as warriors sought worthy opponents among the enemy ranks. Fame and death danced together on the plains of Troy. Glaucus of Lycia advanced toward the Greek lines with confident stride. His bronze armor bore the marks of many battles. His spear had tasted blood in combat across the Mediterranean world. As grandson of the legendary Bellerophon, he carried heroic bloodline that demanded constant proof through dangerous deeds. Diomedes, still flushed with divine favor from his morning exploits, spotted this new challenger approaching. The son of Tydeus had already wounded gods themselves. Surely no mortal opponent could resist his blessed spear. He strode forward eagerly to add another victim to his day's impressive total. Yet something in the Lycian's bearing gave Diomedes pause. This warrior moved with the easy confidence of noble birth and extensive training. His equipment proclaimed wealth and status equal to any Greek champion. Such opponents deserved respect and proper introduction before mortal combat began. The son of Tydeus called across the space between their armies with traditional courtesy. Who was this brave warrior who dared face him in single combat? From what city did he come? Which noble family had produced such evident courage? Honour required proper recognition of worthy enemies before their deaths. Glaucus responded with the elaborate genealogy that heroic culture demanded. His grandfather Bellerophon had performed deeds that poets still celebrated around Mediterranean hearths. The hero had tamed the winged horse Pegasus with Athena's golden bridle. He had slain the monstrous chimera that terrorized ancient Lycia. The Lycian prince continued his ancestral tale with evident pride. Bellerophon had served King Brutus of Tiryns until the queen's unwelcome advances created political complications. False accusations of attempted seduction led to dangerous missions designed to cause the hero's death. Yet divine favour preserved him through every peril. King Iobates of Lycia had received sealed orders to eliminate this troublesome guest. The Chimera's defeat was intended to accomplish this goal indirectly. When that monster fell to Bellerophon's bronze spear, other tasks followed. Amazons, Solymi, and noble conspirators all died before the hero's unstoppable courage. Finally recognizing divine protection in Bellerophon's success, King Iobates offered his daughter and half his kingdom in marriage. The hero's descendants ruled in Lycia through subsequent generations. Glaucus himself commanded warriors who had followed his family for decades. Their loyalty formed bonds stronger than bronze or gold. Diomedes listened to this recitation with growing amazement and delight. His own grandfather, Aeneas, had welcomed Bellerophon as a guest during the hero's wandering years. 20 days of feasting had cemented friendship between their families. Golden cups had sealed bonds that transcended ethnic divisions. The revelation transformed potential enemies into hereditary friends. Guest friendship obligations passed from father to son like treasured heirlooms. Diomedes and Glaucus owed each other protection rather than combat. Their grandfather's bond created sacred duties that superseded military orders and national loyalties. Both warriors laughed with joy at this miraculous discovery. Divine providence had prevented them from committing crimes against ancestral friendship. Zeus himself protected guest-friend relationships. To violate such bonds would invite cosmic punishment that could destroy entire bloodlines. They agreed to avoid each other throughout the battle's remaining phases. Neither would seek the other's death or glory at his expense. Their men would receive orders to respect this personal agreement. Ancient bonds would survive modern conflicts through mutual recognition of superior obligations. The exchange of armor that followed became legendary for its implications about heroic values. Diomedes offered his bronze equipment in token of renewed friendship. Glaucus responded with golden armor worth at least 10 times the Greek's gift. Observers marveled at such apparent inequality, yet Glaucus understood values that transcended mere economics. Honor mattered more than material wealth. Friendship deserved generous recognition. His golden armor proclaimed to both armies that some bonds superseded temporary military alliances. Guest friendship represented civilization's triumph over warfare's brutal necessities. Zeus clouded Glaucus's judgment during this exchange to demonstrate divine influence over mortal decisions. The gods manipulated human choices for purposes that mortals rarely understood fully. What appeared to be generous friendship might serve larger cosmic plans that neither warrior could comprehend. The episode revealed heroic culture's complexity and internal contradictions. Warriors fought to the death against ethnic strangers, while embracing hereditary friends among those same enemies. Personal relationships could transcend political boundaries when backed by divine sanction and ancestral precedent. Both heroes returned to their respective armies carrying news of this remarkable encounter. Their men marveled at fortune that preserved their leaders from mutual destruction. Yet they also recognized the arbitrary nature of survival in warfare. Chance encounters and family histories shaped destinies as much as courage or skill. The bronze gates of Troy swung open to admit its greatest defender. Hector entered his beloved city with dust and blood marking another day's desperate fighting. Women and children crowded the streets to catch glimpses of their protector. Their faces showed the strain of 9 years under siege, but hope still flickered when they saw their prince return safely. The Trojan champion made his way through familiar streets toward the palace complex. These stone walls had sheltered his childhood games and youthful training. Every corner held memories of peaceful years before Greek ships appeared on their horizon. War had transformed his home into a fortress, but love remained stronger than bronze weapons. Hecuba, his royal mother, awaited her son in the palace courtyard with wine to refresh his weary spirit. She offered libations that might win divine favour for her family and city. Yet Hector declined her hospitality with gentle respect. Blood stained his hands from the day's fighting. He could not approach the gods while bearing such ritual pollution. The queen suggested desperate measures as alternative sources of divine assistance. Let all the noble women gather with their finest robes and precious offerings. They would petition Athena in her temple with gifts worthy of a goddess. Perhaps the city's patron deity might be persuaded to protect her worshippers, despite her obvious preference for their enemies. Hector approved his mother's plan while pursuing his own desperate mission. He must find Paris and shame his brother back into the fighting. The Trojan army needed every capable warrior on the walls and battlefield. No able-bodied prince could remain in his palace chambers while common soldiers died for his selfish passions. He found Paris in his private rooms, polishing armour that gleamed like mirror bronze. Helen sat nearby, directing her servant women in weaving colourful tapestries. The domestic scene mocked the suffering that raged outside Troy's walls. While their city faced destruction, the guilty couple pursued peacetime activities. Hector's anger erupted like a volcano that had contained its fires too long. His words cut deeper than any bronze weapon could penetrate flesh. Paris had caused this war through his reckless pursuit of forbidden love. Now he hid from its consequences while better men died defending his selfish choices. Such behaviour dishonoured their royal blood and endangered every Trojan life. Paris accepted his brother's rebuke with surprising grace and evident shame. He admitted his failure to bear appropriate responsibility for the suffering he had caused. Yet he claimed that grief rather than cowardice kept him from the battlefield. Watching friends die for his sake had overwhelmed his spirit with crushing guilt. Helen added her voice to encourage her lover's return to military duty. She recognized her own responsibility for Troy's suffering. Her beauty had brought this curse upon innocent people. The conversation revealed the complex emotions that drove these legendary figures. Paris genuinely loved Helen despite the catastrophic consequences of their union. Helen bore guilt that poisoned her happiness without diminishing her attachment to the man who had rescued her from an unwanted marriage. Hector struggled between fraternal loyalty and patriotic duty. Paris promised to join the fighting after completing his armour preparations. Divine craftsmen had forged his equipment to match his supernatural beauty. Such gear required careful maintenance to preserve its protective and symbolic qualities. He would appear on the battlefield like a god descending from Olympus to aid his mortal worshippers. Hector left his brother with mixed feelings about this delayed commitment to military service. Paris had agreed to fight, but his theatrical concerns about appearance suggested continued selfishness. The prince seemed more interested in creating dramatic effects than saving his city from destruction. The Trojan champion's next destination carried far greater emotional weight. His own palace awaited with the wife and child who represented everything worth defending. Andromache embodied the civilization that Greek spears threatened to destroy. Their son, Astyanax, carried Troy's future in his innocent laughter. He found his beloved wife on the city's ramparts, watching the battle with desperate anxiety. She had seen him fighting in the distance and feared for his safety. Their infant son clung to his nurse's robes while observing the strange world of warfare that surrounded his sheltered existence. Andromache's greeting mixed joy and terror in equal measure. She thanked the gods for her husband's safe return while dreading his inevitable departure for continued fighting. Her words revealed the private anguish that military wives endured throughout the siege. Each dawn might bring news of widowhood and orphaned children. She begged Hector to adopt defensive tactics that might preserve his life. Let him command from the walls rather than fighting in the front ranks. His strategic wisdom mattered more than his personal courage. Troy needed his leadership more than another heroic death that would inspire songs but not save the city. Her plea touched Hector's heart while highlighting the impossible choices that war imposed. His honor demanded personal combat against worthy enemies. His love urged caution that might preserve family happiness. These competing obligations tore at his soul like opposing winds that could capsize even well-built ships. The prince attempted to comfort his wife while acknowledging the grim realities they faced. Troy would fall eventually despite all their courage and sacrifice. Divine will had decreed this outcome through signs that could not be misinterpreted. Yet honor demanded resistance until the final moment rather than shameful surrender. Baby Astyanax began crying when his father tried to hold him. The child's terror of his father's bronze helmet and horsehair plume created a moment of tragic comedy. Hector removed his war gear to reveal the gentle father beneath the warrior's intimidating exterior. The baby's laughter provided brief relief from war's overwhelming darkness. Yet even this tender family scene carried prophetic overtones that chilled observant hearts. Hector's prayer for his son revealed paternal hopes that would never find fulfillment. The child whose name meant Lord of the City would never rule anything but memory and song. His father's fame would outlive Troy's stones and timbers. Evening shadows stretched across the blood-soaked plain as weary warriors prepared to end another inconclusive day of battle. The sun hung low in the western sky like a bronze shield cooling in a smith's workshop. Both armies had fought with desperate courage since dawn, yet neither could claim decisive victory. Death had harvested heroes from both sides without determining the war's ultimate outcome. Hector stepped forward from the Trojan ranks with a challenge that rang across the battlefield. His voice carried the authority of noble blood and proven courage. Let the Greeks choose their finest champion for single combat. They would fight until darkness ended their contest, or death claimed one of them. Honor demanded this test of individual excellence. The Trojan prince's words struck the Greek commanders like stones thrown into still water. Here stood their enemy's greatest warrior, offering himself in combat that could reshape the war's course. Victory would restore Greek confidence and divine favor. Defeat might shatter their army's morale beyond any hope of recovery. Yet fear paralyzed many who should have stepped forward immediately. Hector's reputation preceded him like storm clouds gathering over mountain peaks. His bronze spear had killed countless Greek warriors during 9 years of siege warfare. His shield had turned aside weapons that should have pierced mortal flesh. Divine favor seemed to protect Troy's defender from harm. Menelaus rose from his seat with characteristic courage, overruling practical judgment. The wronged husband had started this war through his personal loss. He would risk everything to end it through personal combat. His honor demanded that he face any challenger, regardless of the obvious disparity in their fighting abilities. The other Greek commanders restrained their king with gentle force and harsh words. Menelaus possessed courage that few men could match, yet courage alone would not suffice against Hector's superior skill. Troy's champion would kill Sparta's king as easily as a wolf dispatches a lamb. Such a death would doom the entire expedition to failure. Old Nestor shamed the younger heroes into action with cutting words that struck deeper than bronze weapons. Where were the mighty warriors who had boasted of their prowess around campfires and wine cups? Had fear reduced them to trembling children when real danger appeared? Their silence dishonored the heroic code they claimed to follow. 9 champions finally volunteered to face Hector's challenge. Ajax the Great towered above his comrades like an oak among saplings. Diomedes had already proven his courage against gods themselves. Agamemnon commanded respect despite his political failures. Odysseus combined wisdom with deadly skill. Others added their names to this roster of volunteers. The lots were cast to determine which hero would represent Greek honour. Smooth stones rattled in a bronze helmet like dice thrown by gambling gods. Each warrior had marked his token with identifying signs. Fate would choose their champion through divine chance rather than human preference. Ajax's stone leaped from the helmet first. The army cheered when they recognized his mark. If any mortal could match Hector in single combat, surely it was this giant son of Telamon. His great shield covered him from head to foot. His massive spear could pierce the strongest armor. Divine blood did not flow in his veins, but his courage matched that of any god. The duel began with formal courtesy that honored both warriors' noble birth. They exchanged genealogies and praised each other's reputation. Such rituals acknowledged that death in battle represented honorable fate rather than criminal murder. Heroes died among their peers with dignity intact. Both men hurled their bronze-tipped spears with accuracy born of years of practice. The weapons struck opposing shields without penetrating their layered construction. Divine craftsmanship and mortal skill combined to protect both champions from immediate death. They drew swords for closer combat that would test strength against strength. The fighting continued with neither warrior gaining decisive advantage over his opponent. Ajax's reach balanced Hector's speed. The Greeks' defensive skill matched the Trojans' attacking fury. Both men bled from minor wounds that proved their mortality without threatening their lives. Darkness finally ended their contest as heralds from both armies intervened. Night had fallen across the battlefield like a cloak thrown over warring children. Divine law protected warriors who fought after sunset. Honor had been satisfied on both sides through courageous combat. The champions exchanged gifts that transformed enemies into respected rivals. Hector presented a silver-studded sword that proclaimed Ajax's valor to future generations. Ajax offered a purple war belt that would remind Hector of Greek excellence. These tokens would outlive their owners to testify about heroic friendship. Both armies marveled at this demonstration of noble conduct in warfare's midst. Heroes could honor worthy enemies while remaining loyal to their own causes. Competition need not destroy the bonds that united all warriors in common understanding of courage and sacrifice. Agamemnon's confidence crumbled like sandcastles before the incoming tide. The indecisive duel between Ajax and Hector had revealed Greek weakness to friends and enemies alike. Their greatest active champion could barely match Troy's defender in single combat. Without Achilles, the expedition faced inevitable defeat and shameful retreat. The king of Mycenae gathered his closest advisers for desperate consultation. 9 years of siege warfare had drained Greece's resources and manpower. Ships needed constant repair from weather and enemy action. Food supplies arrived irregularly from kingdoms facing their own problems. Morale sank lower with each inconclusive battle. Nestor, eldest and wisest of the Greek commanders, spoke truths that others feared to voice. Agamemnon's quarrel with Achilles had brought divine disfavor upon their cause. Zeus himself supported Troy while the Greeks struggled without heavenly assistance. Pride must yield to necessity if they hoped to achieve their goals. The old king of Pylos outlined a strategy for reconciliation that might restore Greek unity. Agamemnon must acknowledge his error publicly before the assembled army. Magnificent gifts would demonstrate royal repentance and respect for Achilles' honor. The son of Peleus might accept compensation that satisfied his wounded pride. Agamemnon's catalogue of proposed gifts revealed the desperation driving his newfound humility. 20 bronze tripods would proclaim Achilles' status among the expedition's leadership. 7 talents of gold represented wealth beyond most kingdoms' treasuries. 12 prize horses embodied speed and nobility that heroes valued above mere metal. The king offered even more precious compensation for his devastating insult. 7 skilled women would serve Achilles in whatever capacity he desired. Briseis herself would return to her former lover with sacred oaths that Agamemnon had never violated her person. Royal marriage alliance would cement their restored friendship. Most remarkably, Agamemnon promised one of his own daughters in marriage after Troy's fall. The bride would bring 7 cities as her dowry. Rich farmland and bustling harbours would make Achilles wealthy beyond any private citizen's dreams. Royal blood would flow in his descendants' veins through future generations. 3 ambassadors received this mission of desperate diplomacy. Phoenix had served as Achilles' tutor during his youth. Paternal affection might succeed where royal authority had failed. Ajax commanded respect through proven courage and straightforward honesty. Odysseus possessed rhetorical skills that could persuade anyone capable of reason. They found Achilles beside his ships, singing ancient songs while Patroclus listened with devoted attention. The hero's clear voice carried across the water like divine music. His golden lyre had belonged to a conquered king. War's hardships had not destroyed his appreciation for beauty and cultural refinement. The ambassadors received courteous welcome despite the mission that brought them. Achilles ordered meat and wine for guests who deserved proper hospitality. Ancient customs demanded generosity toward visitors regardless of political differences. Personal friendship transcended temporary military disagreements. Phoenix spoke first with the emotional authority of surrogate fatherhood. He reminded Achilles of lessons learned during peaceful years before war consumed their lives. Wise men controlled their anger rather than being controlled by it. Divine examples taught restraint and forgiveness as superior to endless revenge. The old tutor's speech blended personal affection with mythological wisdom. He recounted the story of Meleager, who withdrew from battle when insulted by his own people. Family appeals finally restored the hero to fighting, but his delayed assistance cost lives that earlier action might have saved. Ajax followed with blunt appeals to friendship and military necessity. The Greeks faced destruction without Achilles' strength. His comrades would die while he nursed wounded pride in safety. Such behaviour dishonoured the bonds forged through shared danger and common purpose. Odysseus presented Agamemnon's gifts with diplomatic skill that transformed royal arrogance into generous recognition of merit. The king acknowledged his error and offered compensation beyond any previous precedent. Honour would be restored through magnificent gestures that proclaimed Achilles' worth to both armies. Yet Achilles rejected their embassy with reasoning that revealed his deeper understanding of heroic values. Agamemnon's gifts could not repair the fundamental damage done to his reputation. The king had demonstrated contempt that no amount of treasure could erase from public memory. The son of Peleus spoke of choice that defined his existence. He could live quietly and enjoy long years of peaceful obscurity, or he could fight gloriously and achieve immortal fame through early death. Agamemnon's insult had made this decision more complex without changing its essential terms. His mother had revealed the prophecy that shaped his destiny. If he remained at Troy, he would die young but achieve eternal glory. If he sailed home immediately, he would live long but die forgotten. The gifts offered tonight could not alter these fundamental alternatives. Darkness settled over the Trojan plain like a burial shroud covering the day's failures. Both armies posted guards around their camps while most warriors sought rest from another day of inconclusive fighting. Yet some men found sleep impossible when urgent missions called them into night's dangerous embrace. Hector summoned his war council to plan desperate measures that might break the siege's deadlock. 9 years of defensive warfare had weakened Troy's resources without achieving decisive victory. The Greeks remained strong enough to maintain their blockade indefinitely. Bold action offered the only hope of changing this stalemate. The Trojan prince proposed a reconnaissance mission that would gather crucial intelligence about enemy intentions. Greek campfires revealed unusual activity around their beached ships. Were they preparing another assault on the city walls? Or did they plan retreat after their embassy's failure? Knowledge would guide Trojan strategy in either case. Dolon volunteered for this dangerous mission with eagerness that outweighed his courage. The son of Eumedes possessed speed and stealth rather than heroic strength. His father's wealth had purchased the finest equipment, but gold could not buy the wisdom that preserved scouts from enemy spears. Dolon's price for accepting this mission revealed his practical understanding of heroic economics. He demanded Achilles' divine horses as payment for risking his life. These immortal steeds could carry their owner faster than eagles flew through mountain air, Such prizes justified extraordinary danger. The volunteer wrapped himself in a wolf's pelt that would provide camouflage during his infiltration of enemy territory. Grey fur blended with shadows and moonlight. His movements mimicked the predator whose skin he wore. Yet this disguise could not hide his human scent from truly alert sentries. Meanwhile, similar concerns troubled the Greek commanders as they posted extra guards around their vulnerable ships. Odysseus and Diomedes volunteered for their own scouting mission into Trojan territory. These experienced warriors understood night fighting's special requirements and opportunities. They armed themselves with weapons suited for silent killing rather than heroic display. Bronze blades whispered death without announcing their presence to nearby enemies. Leather armor moved quietly compared to clanging metal plates. Stealth mattered more than protection during covert operations. The two scouting parties discovered each other near the midpoint between opposing camps. Dolon's wolf pelt disguise failed to deceive experienced warriors who had hunted both animals and men. His attempted flight ended quickly when divine favor aided his pursuer's speed. Captured alive, Dolon revealed information that would doom his comrades to slaughter. Fear of death loosened his tongue beyond wisdom's restraints. He described the Thracian camp where King Rhesus slept beside horses whiter than snow. These allies had arrived only that evening to reinforce Troy's defenders. Dolon's betrayal of military secrets earned him death despite his cooperation. Enemies could not be trusted with knowledge of Greek plans. His head rolled in the dust while his wolf pelt fluttered in the night breeze. War's necessities overruled mercy toward prisoners who might prove useful. Odysseus and Diomedes continued toward the Thracian camp with deadly purpose. Divine horses represented prizes beyond normal military spoils. Their capture would weaken enemy cavalry while strengthening Greek forces. Such opportunities demanded immediate action regardless of personal risk. They found the Thracian warriors sleeping in neat rows like grain awaiting harvest. Sentries dozed at their posts after wine-heavy victory celebrations. The new allies felt secure in their numerical superiority and divine protection. Such confidence created vulnerabilities that experienced raiders could exploit. The slaughter began silently with bronze knives finding throats in darkness. 12 men died without crying out or waking their comrades. Their blood soaked into foreign soil that would never see their homeland again. Night raids revealed warfare's most brutal aspects. King Rhesus died in his sleep, still dreaming of glorious victories that would never come. His crown rolled away from his severed head like a golden wheel. Royal blood mixed with commoners' gore in democracy of death that recognized no social distinctions. The divine horses stood calmly while strangers approached their picket lines. These immortal creatures understood that destiny had chosen new masters for them. They followed Odysseus and Diomedes toward Greek territory without resistance or alarm calls that might wake sleeping enemies. Dawn revealed the night's carnage to horrified Trojan commanders. Their newest allies lay butchered in their camp like sacrificial animals. The divine horses had vanished along with hopes for decisive cavalry advantage. Enemy raiders had struck with surgical precision that suggested divine assistance. This successful raid demonstrated Greek capabilities that contradicted their recent defensive posture. Skilled warriors remained among their enemies despite losses and declining morale. The night's work warned Trojans that their advantage remained temporary and fragile. Hera gazed upon the battlefield with growing rage and desperate frustration. Her beloved Greeks retreated steadily toward their beached ships while Trojan spears drove them from positions they had held for years. Zeus's promise to Thetis was reshaping the war's course according to his divine will. The Queen of Heaven could not directly oppose her husband's commands, but she possessed other means of influence. The goddess sought her private chambers where golden mirrors reflected divine beauty that had once conquered the heart of cosmic authority itself. Age could not touch immortal flesh, yet time had cooled the passion that made Zeus risk everything for her embrace. Perhaps ancient arts could rekindle desire that political calculation had gradually extinguished. Hera adorned herself with jewels that captured starlight in crystalline depths. Perfumes blessed by Aphrodite herself anointed her immortal skin with fragrances that could madden gods and mortals alike. The golden girdle of love, borrowed secretly from passion's own goddess, encircled her waist with power that no male creature could resist, yet beauty alone would not suffice for her desperate scheme. Sleep, the gentle god who commanded both mortals and immortals, must play his part in this divine conspiracy. Hera sought his cooperation through promises and threats that revealed the stakes involved in her rebellion against Zeus's will. Sleep remembered his previous cooperation in similar schemes. The last time he had drugged Zeus at Hera's request, the king of gods had awakened in towering rage. Only his mother Night's protection had saved Sleep from punishment that would have lasted for eternity. Divine memory preserved such lessons across countless centuries. The Queen of Heaven offered bribes that might overcome Sleep's reasonable caution. One of the Graces would become his bride if he aided her current plot. Pasitheia's beauty would console him for any temporary danger her scheme might create. Divine marriage represented compensation worth considerable risk. Sleep agreed to this bargain despite his fears. Divine loneliness made even risky love preferable to eternal solitude. He would drug Zeus when Hera's seduction reached its climax. The king of gods would sleep deeply enough to permit divine intervention in mortal affairs. Hera approached her husband's golden throne with calculated innocence that masked her treacherous intent. She spoke of concern for mortal relatives fighting in distant lands. Surely Zeus could spare brief attention from cosmic governance to visit those who shared their divine blood. Family obligations deserved consideration even from supreme rulers. Zeus regarded his wife with suspicion born of centuries of matrimonial conflict. Hera's sudden affection typically preceded requests that would complicate his careful plans. Her beauty remained magnificent, but experience taught caution toward goddesses bearing unexpected gifts of love. Yet divine desire proved stronger than political wisdom. Hera's borrowed enchantments overcame Zeus's resistance like floodwaters, overwhelming carefully built dikes. Yet divine desire proved stronger than political wisdom. Hera's borrowed enchantments overcame Zeus's resistance like floodwaters, overwhelming carefully built dikes. The king of gods forgot his promise to Thetis in passion that recalled their secret courtship during Kronos' reign. They embraced on Mount Ida's highest peak while golden clouds concealed their union from mortal and immortal eyes. The earth bloomed beneath them with flowers that released intoxicating perfumes. Divine love-making created temporary paradise that existed outside normal time and space. Sleep seized his opportunity when passion reached its predetermined climax. Divine slumber settled over Zeus like soft blankets wrapping a weary child. The king of gods dreamed of ancient victories while his enemies prepared new interventions in mortal warfare. Hera's triumph proved temporary but decisive for the war's immediate course. Divine politics had created windows of opportunity that other Olympians would exploit immediately. The balance of cosmic power had shifted just enough to permit new divine interventions on Troy's blood-soaked plain. The Earthshaker felt Zeus's consciousness fade like distant thunder after storms had passed beyond the horizon. Poseidon had chafed under his brother's restriction since the war began. The trident-bearer commanded seas and earthquakes, yet divine politics had forced him to remain neutral while mortals he favoured faced destruction. From his underwater palace, Poseidon had watched Greek fortunes decline since Achilles' withdrawal from combat. Hector's spear scattered enemies like leaves before autumn gales. Troy's walls seemed impregnable while divine favour protected the city's defenders. Only direct intervention could restore balance to this cosmic conflict. The sea god disguised himself as Calchas the seer to avoid detection by other divine observers. The elderly prophet commanded respect throughout the Greek army. His prophecies had guided the expedition since its beginning at Aulis. Warriors would heed divine counsel when it came through this trusted voice. Poseidon appeared first to the two Ajax heroes as they prepared defensive positions around their beached ships. The son of Telamon and the son of Oileus had fought with desperate courage throughout the morning's retreat. Their bronze spears had killed many Trojans, yet enemy numbers seemed endless. The disguised god touched both warriors with his divine staff, filling their mortal frames with supernatural strength and courage. Their muscles swelled with power that could bend bronze bars like willow branches. Their hearts burned with confidence that made death seem like a minor inconvenience. Divine energy spread through the Greek ranks like wildfire consuming dry grassland. Warriors who had fled in panic suddenly turned to face their pursuers. Spears that had missed their marks began finding Trojan flesh with deadly accuracy. The retreat slowed, stopped, and began reversing direction. Poseidon moved through the army in various disguises that prevented recognition of his divine nature. Sometimes he appeared as aged Nestor offering tactical wisdom. Other times he took the form of fallen heroes returning to inspire their living comrades. Divine intervention required subtlety to avoid Zeus's detection. Idomeneus of Crete responded to divine encouragement with renewed ferocity that carved paths through enemy formations. The Cretan king's bronze spear drew Trojan blood with mechanical precision. His war cry rallied allied forces that had wavered on the edge of complete collapse. The Trojans found themselves pressed backward by enemies who had seemed defeated moments earlier. Divine favor had shifted like ocean tides responding to celestial influences. Heroes who commanded supernatural strength replaced the frightened men they had been pursuing. Hector felt this change in battlefield dynamics without understanding its divine cause. Greek resistance had stiffened beyond normal human capability. Enemy spears struck with accuracy that suggested heavenly guidance. The easy victory he had expected now seemed impossible to achieve, yet Zeus's slumber could not last forever. Divine consciousness eventually stirred like mountain peaks emerging from dissipating clouds. The king of gods awakened to discover his carefully maintained balance had been disrupted by family conspiracy and divine rebellion. Zeus's rage when he discovered this deception shook Olympus like earthquake tremors spreading through solid bedrock. He summoned Iris, his faithful messenger, to restore cosmic order through immediate commands that would reverse all unauthorized interventions. Poseidon received these orders with sullen compliance that masked continued resentment. The sea god withdrew his divine assistance from Greek warriors, who suddenly felt mortal limitations returning to their exhausted frames. Divine politics had triumphed over family loyalty once again, yet the intervention's effects could not be completely erased. Greek morale had recovered from its lowest point. Warriors remembered that divine favor could shift when they fought with proper courage and determination. Hope had been restored to hearts that had nearly accepted inevitable defeat. Divine blood had stained the Trojan plain when Diomedes struck Aphrodite with his bronze-tipped spear. The sight of ichor flowing from immortal wounds had shocked both armies into temporary silence. Gods could suffer pain just like mortals, though their injuries healed with supernatural speed. Ares descended to the battlefield with vengeance burning in his immortal heart. The war god's sister had been humiliated by a mere mortal warrior. Divine honor demanded satisfaction that would demonstrate the proper relationship between gods and men. No human should dare raise weapons against Olympian authority. The god of warfare's presence transformed the Trojan assault into supernatural fury that drove Greeks backward like sheep fleeing from attacking wolves. His bronze armor gleamed with reflected firelight from burning equipment. His terrible war cry shattered human courage and froze mortal hearts with primal terror. Hector fought beside the war god with renewed confidence that multiplied his natural abilities. Divine favor guided his spear toward Greek hearts with unerring accuracy. Enemy champions fell like wheat before the harvester's blade. Victory seemed assured when gods fought alongside mortal heroes. Yet Athena could not permit her brother's intervention to continue unchallenged. The goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare possessed equal rights to influence mortal conflicts. Divine politics demanded balance even when individual preferences favored one side over another. She descended in her war chariot with Diomedes beside her as chosen champion. The son of Tydeus had already proven his willingness to challenge divine authority. Athena's blessing would multiply his courage beyond normal human limits. Together they would face the war god in direct combat. Divine wisdom guided mortal courage as Diomedes hurled his bronze spear toward Ares's armoured stomach. The weapon struck its target with force that would have shattered mountain boulders. Divine flesh proved vulnerable to bronze guided by superior divine will. Ares's scream of pain and outraged dignity echoed across heaven and earth like thunder exploding in clear skies. The war god had never expected to suffer wounds from mortal weapons. His flight toward Olympus trailed complaints about divine politics and mortal insolence. Zeus received his wounded son with paternal irritation rather than sympathetic concern. The father of gods possessed little affection for Ares's crude approach to warfare. Divine intervention should demonstrate superior wisdom, not mere brute force applied without strategic thinking. The king of gods healed his son's wound while delivering lectures about divine conduct that fell on deaf ears. Ares would learn nothing from this experience beyond resentment towards siblings who had humiliated him before mortal witnesses. Divine character rarely changed despite painful lessons. Meanwhile, on the battlefield below, mortal warriors marveled at evidence of divine vulnerability. Gods could bleed and flee like any other combatant when faced with superior opposition. This knowledge would influence human attitudes toward divine authority for generations to come. The wounding of immortal beings revealed profound truths about the nature of power and authority. Even gods possessed limitations that constrained their actions. Divine politics created conflicts that mortals could exploit when they possessed courage and divine backing. Yet this episode also demonstrated the arbitrary nature of divine favour. Diomedes had wounded 2 gods in a single day, yet his success depended entirely on Athena's protection and guidance. Without divine assistance, mortal achievement remained bounded by human limitations. The gods' retreat to Olympus for healing created temporary peace on the battlefield. Both armies paused to tend their wounded and assess the day's extraordinary events. Divine blood mixed with mortal gore in the dust suggested that all wars involved conflicts larger than human understanding. The Greeks had built their defensive wall during the war's 7th year, when Trojan pressure first threatened their beached ships seriously. Massive stones formed the foundation, while earth and timber completed the fortification. A deep ditch protected the wall's front face, filled with sharpened stakes that could impale charging horses and men. These fortifications had never been tested by sustained enemy assault, until Hector's recent victories drove the Greeks back to their final defensive line. The wall stretched across the narrow plain between sea and hills, blocking Trojan access to the vulnerable ships that represented Greek survival and escape. Yet Poseidon had prophesied that these human constructions would not endure beyond the war's conclusion. When Troy fell and its conquerors sailed home, divine rivers would combine their floods to wash away every trace of mortal engineering. The sea would reclaim its shoreline while nature erased evidence of human ambition. This prophecy revealed profound truths about the temporary nature of human achievement. Men built walls and cities that seemed permanent to their brief lifespans. Yet cosmic time operated on scales that reduced human works to momentary scratches on eternity's surface. The wall's construction had violated divine law by omitting proper sacrifices to the gods who ruled earth and sea. Poseidon's anger at this oversight would ensure the fortification's eventual destruction. Mortal pride consistently ignored divine requirements for any lasting success. Now Trojan spears tested human engineering against divine will as Hector led his forces toward the ditch's muddy depths. War chariots pulled up short when their drivers glimpsed the sharpened stakes waiting below. Infantry would have to cross on foot while enemies rained bronze-tipped death from defensive positions. The ditch itself became a graveyard for warriors who attempted direct assault. Bodies piled upon the stakes like gruesome decorations. Blood turned the muddy water red as wine spilled on altar stones. Yet Trojan courage proved equal to Greek engineering, as heroes found ways across the obstacle. Sarpedon of Lycia grabbed the wall's wooden palisade with hands strong enough to uproot full-grown trees. His divine heritage showed in strength that exceeded normal human capability. Stone blocks loosened under pressure that mortal muscles could never have generated. Other heroes followed his example by concentrating their attacks on specific wall sections. Coordinated assault could achieve what individual courage had failed to accomplish. The fortification's defenders found themselves overwhelmed by multiple simultaneous breaches that divided their attention. Greek resistance stiffened as the threat to their ships became immediate and undeniable. These black-hulled vessels represented their only hope of escape from Trojan vengeance. Once the ships burned, every Greek warrior would die on foreign soil far from home and family. The psychology of siege warfare created desperation that multiplied human capability beyond normal limits. Men fought with supernatural courage when cornered by enemies who offered no mercy. Death in battle seemed preferable to slow starvation behind broken defences. Innovation born of necessity led to new tactical approaches that might have succeeded in different circumstances. Greek engineers diverted small streams to flood sections of the ditch. Fire arrows ignited Trojan siege equipment before it could reach effective range. Yet divine will ultimately determine human success or failure in cosmic conflicts. Zeus had promised Thetis that Greeks would suffer until they acknowledged Achilles' worth. No amount of courage or cleverness could overcome the father of gods' inexorable decree. The son of Zeus advanced toward the Greek wall with divine heritage shining in his golden armor. Sarpedon commanded the finest warriors from distant Lycia, men who had followed him across the wine-dark sea to win glory in foreign wars. Their loyalty to his leadership had been tested through years of hard fighting. Zeus watched his mortal sons approach with paternal agony that tore his immortal heart. Divine foresight revealed the doom approaching this beloved child. Today's battle would claim Sarpedon's life despite his royal blood and heroic courage. Even the king of gods could not save sons from destinies woven by the fates. The father of gods debated intervention that might preserve his offspring from prophesied death. Divine power could transport Sarpedon instantly to safety in his Lycian homeland. No mortal weapon could harm someone under Zeus's direct protection. Yet such action would violate cosmic law that bound even supreme divine authority. Hera counseled against any attempt to save doomed mortals from their appointed fates. If Zeus rescued his son, other gods would demand similar intervention for their own favorites. Divine politics would collapse into chaos as competing interventions destroyed the natural order. The Queen of Heaven reminded her husband that many gods had mortal children fighting in this war. Divine partiality toward individual offspring would create precedents that could not be contained. Cosmic justice required equal treatment for all mortals regardless of their divine parentage. Zeus accepted this wisdom while his heart broke for the son who would die, advancing glory for his family and followers. Divine love could not overcome cosmic necessity when the two forces came into direct conflict. Even supreme power acknowledged limits imposed by greater cosmic principles. Sarpedon addressed his companion Glaucus with words that defined heroic nobility's essential nature. Royal blood brought privileges that ordinary men could never enjoy. Palace halls, choice lands, and rich wine rewarded those born to leadership. Yet nobility's benefits created obligations that could not be ignored. The Lycian prince spoke of honor that transcended personal survival. Common soldiers might flee from dangerous battles without permanent shame. Princes bore responsibilities that demanded courage even unto death. Their followers deserved leaders who shared the risks they commanded others to accept. He acknowledged that death waited somewhere in his future regardless of individual battles. The fates spun destiny threads that no mortal could avoid indefinitely. Heroes could choose the manner of their dying, but not whether death itself would claim them. Sarpedon's speech revealed the heroic code's sophisticated understanding of leadership ethics. Power derived legitimacy from service rather than mere force. Kings who demanded sacrifice from followers must demonstrate willingness to make ultimate sacrifices themselves. The assault on the Greek wall began with coordinated attacks that tested every section simultaneously. Lycian warriors had studied the fortification's construction during previous skirmishes. They concentrated their efforts where stone gave way to timber and earth. Sarpedon seized the wall's parapet with hands that possessed more than human strength. His divine father's blood showed in capability that approached supernatural levels. Stones loosened under pressure that would have defeated ordinary mortals. Menestheus, the Athenian commander, called desperately for reinforcement as his section faced overwhelming pressure. The wall shook under assault that seemed capable of levelling mountains. Greek spears struck Lycian shields without slowing their determined advance. Ajax and Teucer responded to this crisis with characteristic courage and skill. The giant warrior's presence steadied wavering defenders, while his brother's arrows found gaps in enemy armour. Together they represented Greek excellence at its finest level. Yet individual heroism could not overcome divine destiny when cosmic forces had determined the battle's ultimate outcome. Sarpedon's assault would breach the Greek defences despite every effort at resistance. Zeus's promise to Thetis required this temporary Trojan victory. Hector burst through the shattered wall with a boulder in his hands that 6 ordinary men could barely lift. The Trojan prince had been transformed by divine favour into something approaching godlike power. His bronze armour blazed with reflected sunlight as he led his victorious warriors toward their ultimate objective. The Greek ships lay drawn up on the sandy beach like sleeping sea creatures waiting for the tide's return. These black-hulled vessels had carried the flower of Greek manhood across the wine-dark sea to Troy's hostile shores. Now they might become funeral pyres for their crews. Panic began spreading through the Greek ranks as reality of their desperate situation became undeniable. The wall that had protected them for years lay in ruins. Enemy spears drove them steadily backward toward the sea that blocked any further retreat. Death or enslavement awaited every man in the expedition. Hector's war cry echoed across the battlefield like thunder announcing divine judgment. His bronze spear flashed in the sunlight as it found Greek hearts with deadly accuracy. Enemy champions fell before his advance like wheat before the harvester's blade. The Trojan prince called upon his followers to bring fire that would end the Greek threat permanently. Once their ships burned, these foreign invaders could never escape to threaten Troy again. Complete victory lay within reach after 9 years of siege warfare. Fire arrows began striking the ship's tarred hulls with deadly accuracy. The resin that protected wood from seawater also made it burn with intense heat that spread rapidly through rigging and deck planks. Smoke rose in black columns that darkened the afternoon sky. Ajax the Great took position on his own ship's deck with determination that defied divine will itself. The son of Telamon would defend his vessel to the death. His massive spear swept Trojans from the narrow gangplanks like a farmer clearing grain from his threshing floor. The giant warrior's courage inspired others to similar acts of desperate heroism. Greek champions found strength they had not known they possessed when facing the complete destruction of their cause. Ships represented life itself to men trapped on foreign shores. Teucer supported his half-brother with arrows that struck down Trojans as they approached the vulnerable vessels. His bow sang like a divine lyre as bronze-tipped shafts found their marks with deadly precision. Yet even perfect accuracy could not stop the overwhelming enemy numbers. Hector himself approached Ajax's ship with a blazing torch held high above his bronze helmet. The 2 greatest heroes faced each other across the narrow space between victory and defeat. Their personal duel would determine whether Greek ships burned or survived. Ajax hurled his mighty spear with force that could have pierced mountain stone. The bronze point struck Hector's shield but could not penetrate divine craftsmanship. The Trojan prince staggered backward without falling or dropping his precious torch. The Greek giant drew his sword for hand-to-hand combat that would end in death for one of them. Yet other Trojans pressed forward to support their champion, while Greek defenders fell around Ajax's isolated position. Superior numbers began telling despite individual excellence. Flames licked at ship timbers as fire gained hold despite desperate Greek efforts to extinguish the spreading conflagration. The smell of burning tar and seasoned wood filled the air with smoke that stung mortal eyes and throats. Patroclus stood at the entrance to Achilles' hut with tears streaming down his face like a mountain spring fed by melting snow. The gentle warrior had watched Greek slaughter from across the camp until he could no longer bear the sight of friends dying for his companion's wounded pride. Achilles looked up from his golden lyre with surprise at his beloved friend's emotional state. The son of Peleus had been composing songs about ancient heroes, while his comrades fought for their lives. Music had provided escape from the war's immediate pressures and his own conflicted feelings. The son of Menoetius spoke with anguish that came from the depths of his compassionate heart. Greek ships burned while their greatest warrior sat idle, nursing imaginary slights. How could Achilles ignore the suffering of men who had shared dangers and hardships for nearly a decade? He described scenes of carnage that had driven him from the battlefield in horror. Ajax fought alone on his ship's deck while enemies swarmed around him like wolves attacking a cornered stag. Diomedes nursed wounds that had ended his string of victories. Even mighty Agamemnon had been forced to retreat. Patroclus reminded Achilles of their shared upbringing under the centaur Chiron's wise guidance. The ancient teacher had instructed them in more than warfare and athletics. Compassion and loyalty formed essential parts of heroic character. A true warrior protected those weaker than himself. The gentle hero's words cut deeper than any bronze weapon could penetrate flesh. He accused Achilles of heartlessness that exceeded normal human capacity for cruelty. What father and mother could have produced such indifference to suffering? Perhaps the grey sea and harsh rocks had given birth to this pitiless nature. Achilles listened to his friend's reproaches with growing internal conflict between love and pride. He recognized the justice in Patroclus's arguments, while refusing to admit error in his original position. Agamemnon had dishonored him publicly. Such insults demanded satisfaction regardless of consequences. Yet the sight of his beloved friend's tears began melting the ice that had formed around his heart. Patroclus had never asked for anything beyond friendship and companionship. His request now carried the weight of their shared history and mutual affection. The son of Peleus proposed a compromise that might satisfy both friendship and honour. If he could not fight personally without seeming to forgive Agamemnon's insult, perhaps his armour could fight in another's hands. Patroclus could wear the divine equipment and lead the Myrmidons into battle. This solution would restore Greek morale without compromising Achilles' position in their fundamental dispute. The appearance of his armour would convince both armies that he had returned to active fighting. Enemy courage would falter, while allied spirits revived at this apparent reconciliation. Achilles removed his divine armour with hands that trembled slightly at this momentous decision. The bronze plates had been forged by Hephaestus himself as a wedding gift for his parents. No mortal weapon could pierce such divine craftsmanship. Patroclus would fight protected by the gods themselves. Yet dark premonitions shadowed this generous gesture as Achilles helped his friend don the familiar equipment. The armour seemed to resist being worn by hands other than its rightful owners. Divine protection might not transfer automatically to substitute wearers. Achilles gave strict instructions that limited Patroclus's mission to defensive goals. He should drive the Trojans back from the ships, but not pursue them toward the city walls. Personal glory must not override strategic caution. The mission's success depended on achieving specific objectives without exceeding authorized limits. These warnings revealed Achilles' understanding that his friend's gentle nature concealed warriors' pride that could prove dangerous in combat's heat. Patroclus might attempt heroic exploits that exceeded his actual capabilities. Divine armour could not substitute for the experience and strength that made Achilles unique among warriors. The Myrmidons gathered around their substitute leader with joy that had been absent from their ranks since the quarrel began. Their loyalty to Achilles extended naturally to his chosen companion. They would follow Patroclus into battle with the same dedication they had always shown their hereditary commander. The divine armour blazed with inner light as Patroclus emerged from Achilles' quarters. Bronze plates crafted by Hephaestus himself reflected sunlight like mirrors, polished to divine perfection. The great shield bore images of cosmic significance that mortal eyes could barely comprehend. Here walked what appeared to be Achilles himself returning to battle. Both armies paused in their fighting to observe this momentous apparition. Trojans who had been pressing their advantage suddenly found their courage wavering like candle flames in storm wind. The greatest of Greek warriors had apparently abandoned his withdrawal from combat. Divine armour announced the return of superhuman capability to Greek ranks. The Myrmidons formed ranks behind their substitute leader with discipline that had been drilled into them through years of shared campaigns. These elite warriors had never tasted defeat while Achilles commanded them personally. Their loyalty transferred naturally to his chosen representative and beloved companion. Patroclus felt the weight of divine protection settling around his mortal frame like golden clouds descending from Mount Olympus. The armour seemed to pulse with supernatural energy that multiplied his natural strength and courage. For the first time he understood the confidence that divine favour could inspire in heroic hearts. The psychological impact on both armies exceeded the physical reality of one additional warrior entering the fray. Greek morale soared from its lowest point to heights of renewed confidence. Their champion had returned to lead them toward victory that divine justice would surely grant. Trojan commanders who had been planning final assaults on the burning ships suddenly found themselves reconsidering tactical options. Hector himself paused in his advance while assessing this unexpected development. The appearance of Achilles changed every strategic calculation that had guided their recent success. The son of Menoetius led his Myrmidons toward the threatened ships with perfect timing that demonstrated both courage and tactical wisdom. Greek resistance had been crumbling under overwhelming pressure. Fresh troops arriving at the critical moment could reverse the battle's entire course. Fire had already gained hold on several vessel hulls when the counterattack began. Flames licked hungrily at tarred wood and rope, while Greek sailors fought desperately to save their means of escape. The situation remained critical despite this dramatic intervention. Patroclus struck the first Trojan he encountered with divine spear guided by supernatural accuracy. The bronze point pierced armour that should have turned aside mortal weapons. Divine craftsmanship proved its superiority over human skill in this opening exchange. The false Achilles carved a path through enemy ranks like a farmer harvesting grain with perfectly sharpened tools. Trojans fell around him in spreading circles of death that opened gaps in their previously solid formations. Individual excellence began reshaping the battlefield's overall pattern, yet this success came at a price that would ultimately prove catastrophic. Patroclus felt divine power flowing through his veins like wine mixed with liquid fire. The armour's supernatural protection made him feel invincible against any mortal opponent. Such confidence could prove more dangerous than beneficial. The rout began when Trojan courage finally collapsed under pressure that exceeded their psychological endurance. Warriors who had fought with desperate courage suddenly found themselves fleeing toward their city's protecting walls. The appearance of their greatest enemy had shattered morale that 9 years of siege warfare had gradually weakened. Greek cheers echoed across the battlefield as their fortunes reversed with dramatic suddenness. The ships were saved from immediate destruction. The wall could be rebuilt given time and breathing space. Most importantly, divine favour seemed to have returned to their cause. Patroclus pursued the fleeing enemy with growing excitement that overwhelmed his natural caution. Victory intoxicated him like strong wine consumed on an empty stomach. The gentle warrior discovered within himself a capacity for violence that years of peaceful inclination had concealed. 3 times Patroclus assaulted the walls of Troy with divine armour blazing like captured sunlight. His bronze spear struck the ancient stones with force that should have shattered any mortal construction. Yet the city's defences had been blessed by gods who favoured different outcomes than his temporary triumph suggested. Apollo himself defended the sacred citadel that he had helped Poseidon build in ages past. The god of prophecy and plague could not permit mortal weapons to destroy divine craftsmanship. His silver bow remained ready to strike down anyone who exceeded the limits placed on human achievement. The god appeared to Patroclus in visible form with divine radiance that should have warned any mortal of supernatural presence. Yet the false Achilles felt so intoxicated by borrowed power that he failed to recognize cosmic authority standing before him. Apollo's first warning carried the weight of divine concern for mortal welfare. The son of Menoetius had achieved remarkable success through courage and divine protection. Yet wisdom demanded recognition of appropriate limits before pride led to catastrophic consequences. The god reminded Patroclus of his essential mortality despite the divine armor that temporarily elevated his capabilities. No mortal could storm heaven-blessed walls regardless of equipment or divine favor. Troy would fall eventually, but not through unauthorized assault by substitute heroes. Yet divine intoxication had overwhelmed the gentle warrior's normally sound judgment. He heard Apollo's words without comprehending their significance or urgency. The armor seemed to whisper that nothing could resist his divinely enhanced strength and courage. Apollo's second warning carried more explicit threats about the consequences of continued defiance. Divine patience had limits that mortals crossed at their mortal peril. Even gods' favorites could not expect unlimited protection when they violated cosmic law through excessive ambition. The Lord of the Silver Bow reminded Patroclus that Troy's destiny had been determined by powers greater than any individual god or hero. The city would fall when the fates decreed its destruction, not before. Mortal impatience could not accelerate divine timetables. Still, the false Achilles pressed his assault with reckless determination that approached madness. Divine armor had convinced him that normal limitations no longer applied to his enhanced capabilities. Surely the gods would not permit their chosen champion to fail in righteous combat. Apollo's third and final warning abandoned gentle persuasion for direct divine command. The god's voice carried cosmic authority that made mountains tremble and seas retreat from their shores. No mortal could mistake such power for anything less than ultimate reality. The warning spoke of doom approaching through stubborn refusal to accept divine counsel. Death waited for heroes who exceeded their allotted portions of glory and achievement. The son of Menoetius had won sufficient fame for one day's fighting. Yet Patroclus launched his fourth assault on Troy's divine walls with determination that sealed his approaching fate. Some warriors possessed tragic flaws that made destruction inevitable, regardless of warnings or divine favor. Pride had conquered wisdom in this gentle heart. Apollo struck the false Achilles with invisible force that sent divine armor clattering across stone pavements like bronze bells announcing disaster. The god's blow stunned Patroclus into helpless vulnerability that enemies would immediately exploit. Divine armor scattered across the blood-soaked ground like golden leaves blown by autumn winds. Patroclus stood stunned and defenseless, while bronze plates that had protected him rolled away beyond his reaching hands. Apollo's stunning blow had stripped him of supernatural protection at the moment of greatest danger. Euphorbos of Dardania seized this opportunity with the speed of a hunting hawk, diving toward helpless prey. His bronze-tipped spear found the gap between shoulder blades, where divine armor no longer provided its magical protection. The point pierced mortal flesh with deadly accuracy. Yet this wound, though serious, would not have proven immediately fatal to a warrior of Patroclus' strength and experience. The son of Menoetius might have survived to fight again if other enemies had not pressed their advantage with coordinated attacks. Blood flowed from the spear wound like wine from a cracked amphora. Patroclus felt divine strength draining from his limbs as supernatural protection abandoned him completely. The gentle warrior faced mortality that divine favor had temporarily postponed. Euphorbos withdrew his bloody spear and retreated into the swirling combat before his victim could respond with counterattack. The Dardanian prince understood that wounded heroes remained dangerous until death actually claimed them. Discretion served better than continued aggression. Hector appeared through the dust clouds like destiny itself approaching in bronze armor. Troy's greatest defender had recognized the opportunity that Apollo's intervention had created. This false Achilles would die by Trojan spear rather than return to inspire further Greek resistance. The son of Priam advanced with careful confidence that avoided the reckless courage which had destroyed lesser heroes. Patroclus might be wounded and stripped of divine protection, yet he remained a formidable opponent who deserved respectful caution. They faced each other across the narrow space that separated life from death on every battlefield. Two heroes representing different cities and causes, yet united by the warrior's code that made honourable enemies into respected rivals. Patroclus spoke first with words that carried prophetic power despite his weakening condition. He acknowledged Hector's approaching victory while predicting the Trojan prince's own doom. Achilles would avenge this death with fury that gods themselves would struggle to contain. Hector dismissed these prophecies as the desperate boasts of a dying man. No mortal could predict divine will with certainty. The future remained hidden behind veils that only gods could penetrate. His own fate lay in immortal hands beyond human understanding. The Trojan prince's bronze spear found its mark with precision that years of training had perfected. The point penetrated Patroclus's stomach where divine armour no longer protected vulnerable flesh. Death approached with the inexorable certainty that defined every hero's ultimate destiny. Yet even dying, the gentle warrior found strength for final words that would echo through the ages. His prophecy named Hector's killer and predicted the manner of Troy's eventual destruction. Divine inspiration granted the gift of foresight to heroes facing death. Hector stripped the divine armour from his fallen enemy with hands that trembled slightly at this momentous achievement. Achilles' equipment would protect Troy's champion in future battles. The gods had transferred their favour to worthier recipients. The battle for Patroclus's body began immediately as both armies recognized the symbolic importance of this corpse. Greeks could not permit their heroes' remains to suffer dishonour. Trojans sought proof of victory that would demoralize their enemies completely. Ajax and Menelaus led the Greek effort to recover their fallen champion. These heroes understood that Achilles' rage would consume them all if Patroclus's body fell into enemy hands. Personal survival depended on honouring the dead appropriately. The fighting over one man's corpse exceeded in intensity many battles involving thousands of warriors. Individual relationships created obligations that transcended strategic calculations. Love and loyalty demanded sacrifices that military necessity would have rejected. Antilochus, fastest of the Greek runners, received the terrible mission of carrying news to Achilles. The son of Nestor understood that his message would unleash consequences that would reshape the war's entire course, yet duty demanded delivery regardless of personal cost. He found Achilles beside his ships, still believing that Patroclus fought safely protected by divine armour. The hero's confidence dissolved like morning mist when he heard the messenger's awful words. His beloved companion lay dead on Troy's bloody plain. Achilles' grief erupted with force that shook earth and heaven. Divine prophecy had warned him of this choice between long life and eternal glory. Now the decision had been made through love rather than ambition. His gentle friend's death demanded vengeance that would echo through eternity. Black dust covered Achilles like a funeral shroud as he collapsed beside Antilochus. The son of Peleus poured handfuls of earth over his golden hair until no trace of its divine lustre remained visible. His magnificent form, crafted by gods to inspire awe in mortal hearts, became indistinguishable from common clay. The hero's grief transcended normal human sorrow. His cries echoed across the water like the lamentations of sea creatures mourning their lost young. Ships' crews paused in their duties to listen with wonder and terror. Even hardened warriors wept when they heard such anguish pouring from their greatest champion's heart. Thetis felt her son's despair from her silver throne beneath the ocean waves. The sea goddess rose from Poseidon's realm with speed that made dolphins seem motionless. Her maternal heart broke when she beheld Achilles writhing in dust that transformed divine beauty into mortal clay. She gathered her immortal son in arms that had once held him as a helpless infant. Her tears fell like pearls into the Mediterranean foam. Divine mothers suffered when their children chose paths that led to early graves and eternal fame. Love could not protect against destiny's demands. Achilles spoke through sobs that shook his bronze-muscled frame like earthquakes disturbing mountain foundations. He had failed his beloved companion through selfish pride that valued personal honor above friendship. Patroclus had died wearing armor that should have protected its rightful owner. The hero's self-reproach revealed the terrible psychology of survivor's guilt. He should have been the one to face Hector's deadly spear. Divine armor belonged to him by right and responsibility. His withdrawal from battle had created the circumstances that doomed his gentlest friend. Thetis reminded her son that choice and consequence were woven together like threads in the fates' eternal tapestry. The path to glory required sacrifices that broke heroic hearts. Patroclus had chosen to wear the armor knowing the risks. His death served purposes larger than individual friendship. Yet maternal wisdom could not ease the anguish that consumed Achilles' immortal soul. He demanded immediate vengeance against Hector and all who had aided the Trojan champion. Let the earth drink Trojan blood until his friend's ghost felt satisfied with appropriate honor. The sea goddess warned her son that revenge would accelerate his own approaching doom. Divine prophecy had linked his fate to Hector's death. If he killed Troy's greatest defender, his own life would end shortly afterward. Glory and death remained inseparable in heroic destiny. Achilles accepted this price without hesitation or regret. Life held no meaning without the companion who had shared his thoughts and dreams. Better to die gloriously avenging beloved friendship than to live with the shame of unavenged loss. His choice was made. Thetis recognized the futility of opposing such determination. Divine love must sometimes permit destructive choices that fulfilled essential aspects of heroic nature. She promised new armor to replace the divine equipment that Hector had stripped from Patroclus's corpse. The goddess departed for Hephaestus's workshop while her son continued his desperate mourning. Achilles would not eat or drink until revenge satisfied his grief. The hero's fast threatened to waste divine strength before battle could restore his honor. His myrmidons gathered around their grief-stricken leader with sorrow that matched his own intensity. These elite warriors had loved Patroclus like a younger brother. His gentle nature had balanced their leader's fierce temperament. The loss diminished their entire community, yet they also understood that this tragedy would unleash their commander's full potential. Achilles had fought with restraint during previous battles. Now divine fury would guide his spear without mercy or limitation. The Trojans would learn what happened when gods truly abandoned their protection. Hephaestus laboured at his divine forges with skill that had crafted wonders since the cosmos began. The lame god's workshop blazed with fires hotter than earthly volcanoes. His bronze hammers rang against divine anvils like thunder echoing through mountain caverns. Here the finest armour ever conceived would take shape. 20 golden bellows breathed life into flames that melted metals unknown to mortal smiths. Silver mixed with tin and bronze to create alloys that would turn aside any weapon forged by human hands. Divine craftsmanship surpassed mortal understanding through techniques that gods alone commanded. The fire god worked with desperate speed that honoured his friendship with Thetis. The sea goddess had once saved him from Zeus's wrath when divine politics had threatened his existence. Gratitude motivated excellence that would protect her doomed son during his brief remaining life. Leg guards took shape first, gleaming like captured starlight. The bronze plates curved to match divine proportions while offering complete protection against mortal weapons. Decorative inlays depicted scenes of athletic competition that celebrated peaceful excellence. The corselet blazed brighter than the sun when Hephaestus lifted it from his cooling bath. Golden threads wove through bronze foundation to create patterns that told stories of divine craftsmanship. No spear point could pierce such perfection, regardless of the strength behind it. Yet the helmet surpassed even these marvels through artistic achievement that approached cosmic significance. Golden plumes danced like living flames around the bronze crest. Divine fire would blaze from Achilles' head when he entered battle wearing this supernatural crown. But the shield represented Hephaestus's masterpiece, a work that contained entire universes within its circular perfection. The divine craftsman had depicted all of human existence across its polished surface. Here, civilization and warfare danced their eternal ballet of creation and destruction. The shield's center showed the earth, sea, and sky in perfect proportion. The sun blazed golden while silver moon and stars wheeled through their appointed courses. Divine geography provided the stage for human drama about to unfold across the remaining surface. 2 cities occupied the shield's inner ring with contrasting fates that reflected humanity's dual nature. One celebrated a wedding feast with music and dancing that honored peaceful prosperity. The other endured siege warfare that tested courage against desperation. The peaceful city revealed civilization's highest achievements. Elders judged legal disputes with wisdom accumulated through generations of experience. Markets bustled with trade that connected distant regions. Children played in streets made safe by just governance and shared prosperity. Yet the besieged city showed humanity's darker potential. Warriors fought on walls while women watched in terror. Death stalked through streets where peace had once reigned. The siege's outcome remained uncertain as courage faced overwhelming numbers. Beyond the cities, the shield depicted rural life that sustained urban civilization. Farmers ploughed rich soil while their oxen strained against heavy yokes. Golden grain fell before sharp sickles as harvest time blessed human labor. Pastoral scenes celebrated the foundations of human prosperity. A vineyard heavy with purple grapes showed divine blessing in natural abundance. Young people sang harvest songs while their elders supervised the vintage. Wine would flow from these grapes to gladden hearts in future seasons. Divine favor made the earth fruitful. Cattle and sheep wandered through meadows where lions waited in ambush. The eternal struggle between predator and prey continued without regard for human civilization. Nature remained wild beneath the veneer of agricultural order that men imposed through constant vigilance. The shield's outer rim depicted ocean, the river that encircled all terrestrial existence. Divine waters flowed in endless circles that contained all mortal experience. Even this masterwork acknowledged limits that bounded human achievement within cosmic order. When Hephaestus completed his work, the armor blazed with light that illuminated his workshop like captured lightning. Divine craftsmanship had created protection worthy of the greatest hero ever born. Yet this equipment carried symbolic weight beyond mere military utility. The armor represented transformation that would remake Achilles into something approaching divine status. Yet it also symbolized the burden of destiny that required heroic sacrifice. Divine gifts came with obligations that mere mortals could barely comprehend. Dawn broke grey and reluctant over the Greek encampment as heralds summoned the army to witness their leader's public reconciliation. 9 years of shared hardship had taught these warriors to distrust dramatic gestures. Yet hope stirred in hearts that had nearly accepted inevitable defeat. Agamemnon approached the assembly with gifts that proclaimed his desperation more eloquently than any words. 20 bronze tripods gleamed in the morning light. 7 talents of gold caught the sun's rays like captured starfire. The king's treasure wagons groaned under the weight of compensation. The son of Atreus spoke with humility that would have seemed impossible during his days of supreme confidence. He acknowledged divine madness that had clouded his judgment during the original quarrel. Zeus himself had sent delusion that made wise kings commit foolish acts. Divine intervention provided face-saving explanation for royal stupidity that had nearly doomed the entire expedition. 8, goddess of blind folly, had deceived even Zeus when she tricked him into swearing oaths he later regretted. Mortal kings could hardly resist temptations that overcame divine wisdom, yet Agamemnon's excuses rang hollow to men who had watched their comrades die, while their greatest champion sulked beside his ships. Divine madness might explain initial errors, but stubborn pride had prolonged the quarrel beyond any reasonable justification. The king enumerated his gifts with precise detail that emphasized their value. 12 prize horses would carry Achilles in future battles. 7 skilled women would serve his household needs. Cities rich in farmland and commerce would provide income worthy of royal status. Most significantly, Briseis would return to her former lover with sacred oaths that Agamemnon had never claimed his rights over her person. The woman's honour remained intact despite her captivity. Royal restraint had preserved what mattered most to heroic pride. Achilles listened to these offers with visible impatience that revealed his transformed priorities. Material compensation could not restore Patroclus to life, or ease the grief that consumed his heart. Vengeance mattered more than treasure to this mourning hero. The son of Peleus spoke briefly and with contempt for ceremonies that delayed his urgent mission. Let others divide the gifts among themselves. He cared nothing for gold or horses or women. Only Hector's blood could satisfy his friend's ghost. Yet Odysseus counselled patience that honoured both divine law and military necessity. The army must witness proper reconciliation before any fighting began. Sacred rituals required completion to ensure divine favour in the coming battle. Formality served practical purposes. The king of Ithaca also reminded Achilles that warriors needed food before they could fight effectively. The hero's grief fasting had weakened him despite his supernatural strength. Divine armour required mortal energy to achieve its full potential. Agamemnon swore mighty oaths that called upon Zeus, Earth, and Sun to witness his promises. He had never touched Briseis inappropriately. The gifts he offered came freely without obligation or expectation of specific gratitude. Honour was being restored through generous recognition. A boar died beneath ceremonial knives as blood sealed the reconciliation between Greece's two greatest leaders. Sacred rituals bound their agreement with divine sanction. The army cheered when ancient forms were properly observed. Briseis returned to Achilles' embrace with tears that expressed complex emotions beyond simple joy. She had mourned Patroclus like a brother who had shown her kindness during her captivity. His death had left her completely friendless among foreign warriors. The woman's lament revealed the perspective of war prizes who suffered regardless of which heroes possessed them. Her original husband and brothers had died when Greeks captured her city. Now her protector among the captors had fallen to Trojan spears. War destroyed innocent lives without regard for justice or mercy. Achilles accepted her return with gentle courtesy that showed his essential nobility beneath the grief and rage. Personal loss had not destroyed his capacity for tenderness toward those who depended on his protection. Love remained possible even in war's darkest hours, yet the reconciliation ceremony felt hollow to both principles despite its public success. Agamemnon's apology could not erase memories of humiliation that had driven Achilles to withdraw. The hero's acceptance stemmed from necessity rather than forgiveness. The machinery of heroic society had restored functional relationships without healing emotional wounds. Honour had been satisfied through appropriate gestures, but hearts remained unchanged. Political necessity had triumphed over personal feeling. Zeus observed the mortal reconciliation from his golden throne with satisfaction that masked deeper concerns. The brief intervention he had permitted to honour Thetis was approaching its natural conclusion. Achilles would return to battle with fury that would reshape the war's final phase, yet the father of gods recognized that divine politics had grown too complex for simple solutions. Every Olympian had developed strong preferences about the conflict's outcome. Continued restrictions on their involvement would create tensions that might explode into open divine warfare. The King of Heaven summoned all immortals to assembly on Mount Olympus, with words that carried cosmic authority. Golden thrones materialized around his supreme seat, as gods and goddesses answered his imperative call. Divine politics would reshape itself through this momentous gathering. Zeus spoke with weary recognition of inevitabilities that even supreme power could not avoid. The time had come to permit open divine participation in mortal conflicts. His own promise to Thetis had created precedents that other gods would demand for their own favourites. He released the Olympians from restrictions that had prevented direct intervention in human warfare. Let each deity choose sides according to personal preference and ancient loyalties. Divine favor would flow freely to whichever mortals earned immortal support through courage and proper sacrifice. This decision acknowledged that cosmic order required periodic chaos to prevent even greater disruptions. Divine suppression of natural inclinations had created pressures that threatened heaven's stability. Better to permit controlled conflict than to risk divine civil war. The gods responded to this liberation with joy that revealed how deeply they had resented their enforced neutrality. 9 years of watching mortal conflicts without direct participation had frustrated immortal beings who lived for dramatic intervention in human affairs. Hera chose the Greek cause with predictable enthusiasm that stemmed from her ancient hatred of Troy. Paris's judgment still rankled in her immortal memory. The city that had insulted her beauty would pay appropriate prices for such blind folly. Athena joined her stepmother's faction with equal determination. Wisdom favored the Greeks who honored her temples and sought her guidance. Their eventual victory would demonstrate divine justice operating through human warfare. Poseidon sided with his brother's wife despite their frequent quarrels. The Earthshaker had built Troy's walls in ancient times, yet the city's current inhabitants had forgotten proper gratitude. Divine favor could be withdrawn when mortals proved ungrateful. Apollo chose Troy's cause with a loyalty that honored his long service as the city's patron deity. His temple within Priam's palace had received magnificent offerings through generations of royal piety. Divine gratitude demanded reciprocal protection. Artemis followed her twin brother's example, while Aphrodite remained loyal to Paris and the love affair that had started this cosmic conflict. Ares joined them primarily to oppose his sister Athena, in conflicts that reflected their eternal rivalry. The choosing of sides revealed divine personalities in their most petty and human aspects. Immortal beings possessed the same capacity for grudges and favoritism that characterized mortal politics. Divine perfection remained an unrealized ideal even on Mount Olympus, yet this divine factionalism would multiply the coming battle's intensity beyond anything previously witnessed. When gods fought through mortal champions, individual combats became cosmic struggles, with consequences that would echo through eternity. Zeus retained his nominal neutrality while secretly hoping for outcomes that would satisfy justice without completely destroying either side. Divine wisdom recognized that total victory for either faction would create imbalances that might destabilize the entire cosmic order. Divine chariots rolled across heaven's golden plain like storm clouds gathering for cosmic tempest. Immortal warriors donned armor that blazed with captured starlight. The very air trembled as gods prepared for conflicts that would shake Earth's foundations and disturb the sea's depths. Athena faced her brother Ares with contempt that had simmered through countless centuries of sibling rivalry. Wisdom and strategic thinking would prove their superiority over brute force and mindless aggression. Their personal conflict embodied eternal struggles between civilization and chaos. The goddess of warfare struck first with precision that demonstrated perfect timing and tactical awareness. Her bronze spear found gaps in Ares's divine armor that should not have existed. Even gods could be surprised by superior skill applied with calculated fury. Ares responded with berserker rage that made mountains tremble and seas retreat from their shores. His bronze sword carved through divine flesh with savage enthusiasm that knew no restraint or mercy. Yet fury without wisdom remained ultimately self-defeating. The war god's blood flowed like liquid fire across heaven's golden pavement. Divine ichor burned where it touched solid matter. Ares fled toward Zeus's throne, trailing complaints about sibling cruelty and paternal favoritism. Poseidon challenged Apollo to combat that would settle their ancient disputes about divine precedence and territorial authority. The Earthshaker commanded oceans and earthquakes, while the Far Shooter ruled prophecy and plague. Their rivalry dated to the cosmos's earliest epochs, yet Apollo declined direct combat with diplomatic words that concealed deeper wisdom. Gods should not shed immortal blood over mortal conflicts that would end regardless of divine intervention. Cosmic perspective demanded restraint that preserved divine dignity. The refusal enraged Artemis, who accused her brother of cowardice that dishonored their family's martial reputation. Divine pride demanded satisfaction through heroic combat. Retreat suggested weakness that enemies would exploit in future conflicts. Hera silenced the virgin goddess with divine authority that demonstrated supreme queenly power. A backhand blow sent Artemis tumbling across heaven, while her silver arrows scattered like fallen stars. Divine hierarchy required acknowledgement even among fighting relatives. Artemis wept with shame that would have moved mortal hearts to pity. Yet divine politics permitted no mercy for those who challenged superior authority. The Queen of Heaven had reminded everyone of established order that warfare could not overturn. Hermes faced Leto with gallant courtesy that avoided actual combat through diplomatic charm. The messenger god possessed wisdom that recognized futility in fighting divine mothers defending their children's interests. Better to preserve dignity through graceful withdrawal. These divine conflicts reveal the gods' essential humanity despite their immortal nature. They experienced the same emotions and petty jealousies that motivated mortal behavior. Divine perfection remained more aspiration than achievement even on Mount Olympus. The comedy of divine warfare contrasted sharply with human tragedy, unfolding simultaneously on Troy's blood-soaked plain. Gods could afford to treat conflicts as entertainment, since their injuries healed quickly and their lives faced no permanent consequences, yet their interventions would multiply human suffering through supernatural enhancement of natural violence. When gods chose sides in mortal wars, the results invariably exceeded anything that human capability alone could achieve. The hero's war cry split the morning air like bronze axes cutting through ancient oak trees. Divine armor blazed with inner fire that made observers shield their eyes from supernatural radiance. Achilles had returned to warfare with fury that transcended human limitations. His voice carried across the battlefield with power that seemed to shake Troy's ancient foundations. Trojans who had been pressing their advantage suddenly found their courage evaporating like morning mist before blazing sunlight. Their greatest enemy had abandoned his withdrawal from combat. The son of Peleus advanced with supernatural speed that made his myrmidons struggle to maintain formation. Divine armor multiplied his natural capabilities beyond mortal comprehension. Each stride covered ground that ordinary men could barely match at full sprint. Trojans scattered before his approach like autumn leaves driven by hurricane winds. Warriors who had fought bravely for 9 years suddenly discovered the meaning of true terror. Divine wrath had taken human form and walked among them with bronze spear thirsting for blood. The first Trojan to face Achilles in direct combat died before he could raise his shield. The hero's spear moved faster than human eyes could follow. Divine bronze pierced mortal flesh without resistance or delay. Death came so quickly that victims felt no pain. Bodies began piling around Achilles like grain heaped on a threshing floor. His supernatural strength drove his spear completely through armored men to strike enemies behind them. Single thrusts killed multiple opponents through sheer divine force. The Scamander River ran red with Trojan blood as Achilles drove fleeing enemies into its normally clear waters. Divine fury had transformed the gentle stream into a crimson torrent that carried corpses toward the distant sea. Even the river god protested this pollution of his sacred waters. Scamander appeared to Achilles in visible form with divine authority that should have commanded mortal respect. Yet the hero's rage recognized no limitations imposed by supernatural beings. Divine water rose in rebellion against this desecration of natural order. Waves crashed against Achilles with force sufficient to shatter city walls. Yet Hephaestus's armor protected its wearer from elemental fury that would have destroyed lesser heroes. The fire god himself intervened to preserve his masterwork from destruction. Divine flames dried the flooded riverbed and drove back waters that had threatened to drown the son of Peleus. Even nature must yield before properly directed divine will. Achilles continued his slaughter with methodical efficiency that reduced warfare to industrial process. His spear found targets with mechanical precision that never varied or failed. Death flowed from his bronze point like grain from a miller's hopper. The hero had become something more than human, yet less than divine through grief that transcended normal emotional boundaries. His love for Patroclus had transformed into cosmic force that reshaped reality through pure destructive will. Trojans fled toward their city's protecting walls with panic that infected even veteran warriors. No strategy or courage could prevail against fury that possessed supernatural enhancement. Their only hope lay in stone barriers that might contain this human tempest. Yet Achilles pursued them with speed that made escape impossible for anyone caught in open ground. Divine armor had transformed him into a force of nature that acknowledged no mercy or limitation. Death walked the Trojan plain with bronze spear and blazing shield. The bronze gates of Troy swung shut behind the last fleeing warriors with finality that echoed like funeral drums. Ancient hinges groaned under massive weight as the city sealed itself against divine fury that prowled outside its walls. Yet one figure remained beyond the barriers that protected his people. Hector stood alone on the dusty plain that separated him from safety. Troy's greatest defender had chosen to face Achilles in single combat, rather than seek shelter behind walls his ancestors had built. Honor demanded this confrontation regardless of its inevitable outcome. King Priam watched his beloved son from the city's highest tower with anguish that tore his aged heart. The old king's voice carried across the intervening distance as he begged Hector to seek safety within the citadel. Personal courage meant nothing if it doomed the entire city to destruction. The king reminded his son of obligations that transcended individual heroism. Hector's death would leave Troy defenseless against Greek vengeance. Wives and children depended on his leadership for their continued existence. Wisdom counseled strategic retreat over glorious death. Queen Hecuba added her maternal voice to this desperate plea. She had nursed this child at her breast and watched him grow into manhood. Now she might witness his destruction at enemy hands while powerless to intervene. Maternal love begged him to choose life over honor, yet Hector felt the weight of shame that would accompany retreat from this ultimate test. His boasts had led Troy's army onto the plain where Achilles now harvested them like ripe grain. Personal responsibility demanded that he face consequences of his military leadership. The Trojan prince debated internally between competing obligations that pulled his noble heart in opposite directions. Survival might preserve his family, but would stain his reputation forever. Death would maintain honor while abandoning those who needed his protection most. He thought of Polydamas, the wise counselor whose advice he had repeatedly ignored during recent campaigns. The prudent warrior had urged caution when Hector demanded aggressive action. Perhaps wisdom should have guided decisions that pride had dominated. Divine prophecy had warned that Troy would fall regardless of individual heroic efforts. The fates had decreed the city's destruction through means that mortal courage could not prevent. Yet heroes must play their appointed roles until destiny fulfilled itself. The sound of approaching bronze armor announced Achilles' arrival like thunder preceding lightning strikes. Divine wrath had taken human form and walked across the battlefield with supernatural purpose that recognized no obstacle or limitation. When Hector saw divine armor blazing in the sunlight, his courage faltered like a candle flame guttering in strong wind. This was not the Achilles who had quarreled with Agamemnon and withdrawn from battle. Divine transformation had created something approaching godlike power. Terror seized the Trojan prince despite years of proven courage in desperate situations. His body responded to supernatural threat with instincts that overwhelmed conscious intention. Flight replaced fight as his primary impulse when faced with divine fury. Hector ran along Troy's walls with speed born of absolute desperation. Yet Achilles pursued him with supernatural velocity that made escape impossible. Divine armor multiplied the hero's natural capabilities beyond any mortal hope of matching. 3 times they circled the ancient city while gods and mortals watched this cosmic chase with fascination and horror. Zeus weighed their fates in golden scales, While other immortals chose sides according to personal preference and ancient loyalties, Athena descended to earth in disguise as Deiphobus, Hector's trusted brother. The goddess appeared beside the fleeing prince with encouragement that would seal his doom. Divine deception had entered the final phase of this tragic drama. The false Deiphobus spoke with familiar voice that carried brotherly affection and military confidence. He had brought additional spears for the coming combat. Together they could face Achilles with coordinated tactics that might overcome individual superiority through superior numbers and strategy. Hector's heart lifted with relief that transcended rational analysis. His beloved brother had chosen to share this ultimate danger, rather than seek safety behind Troy's protecting walls. Family loyalty had triumphed over personal survival instincts. The Trojan prince turned to face his pursuer with renewed courage that drew strength from apparent companionship. 2 against 1 offered better odds than single combat against divinely enhanced fury. Perhaps honor could be satisfied without certain death. Achilles slowed his supernatural pursuit when his quarry stopped running. The son of Peleus had no interest in lengthy chases, when direct confrontation could satisfy his grief more quickly. Let this Trojan face the consequences of killing gentle Patroclus. Hector called across the narrow space that separated life from death, with dignity that honoured his royal blood. He proposed formal terms that might govern their combat. The winner would treat his opponent's body with appropriate respect. Proper burial rites would honour the defeated hero. The son of Peleus rejected any agreement that implied mercy or restraint. Wolves made no treaties with lambs they intended to devour. His fury recognized no limitations imposed by civilized custom or religious obligation. Patroclus's ghost demanded complete satisfaction. Achilles spoke of revenge that would exceed normal bounds of acceptable behavior. Hector's body would feed dogs and vultures rather than receiving proper burial. Divine armor had been stripped from better men than this Trojan coward who fled from righteous combat. Yet the exchange revealed essential nobility in both warriors despite their mortal enmity. They acknowledged each other's courage while maintaining resolve that demanded combat to the death. Honor could be recognized even between enemies committed to mutual destruction. Hector hurled his bronze spear first with accuracy that years of training had perfected. The weapon struck Achilles' divine shield but could not penetrate Hephaestus's masterwork. Mortal craftsmanship proved insufficient against divine artistry. The Trojan prince called upon his brother for a replacement weapon. Yet when he turned toward expected assistance, he found empty air where Deiphobus should have stood. Divine deception had revealed itself at the moment of greatest need. Athena's trickery filled Hector with despair that replaced hope like darkness swallowing light. The gods had abandoned him to face divine fury without assistance or protection. Yet noble blood demanded courage even in hopeless circumstances. Achilles launched his bronze spear with force that could have pierced mountain stone. Divine anger guided the weapon toward its target with supernatural accuracy that no mortal skill could deflect. The point found the gap where helmet met corselet. Bronze pierced flesh with finality that ended Troy's hopes along with its greatest defender. Hector fell like a toppled tower, while his lifeblood darkened the dust beneath his dying form. Divine vengeance had claimed its appointed victim. Yet even dying, the Trojan prince found strength for prophetic words that carried divine inspiration. He named Achilles' killer and predicted the manner of his approaching doom. Paris's arrow would find its mark when Apollo guided the shot. The son of Peleus dismissed these prophecies as desperate ravings of a defeated enemy. Death made cowards of brave men through fear of approaching darkness. No mortal could predict divine will with accuracy that commanded respect. Yet Hector's final words carried weight that future events would vindicate completely. Divine inspiration granted the gift of foresight to heroes facing their ultimate destiny. Truth spoke through lips that death was already sealing forever. Achilles stood over Hector's corpse with satisfaction that failed to fill the emptiness consuming his heart. Patroclus remained dead despite this revenge. Divine fury had claimed its intended victim, yet grief continued gnawing at the hero's immortal soul like wolves devouring living prey. Other Greeks gathered around their champion with awe that bordered on religious reverence. They had witnessed divine wrath operating through human agency. The son of Peleus had become something more than mortal through grief that transcended normal emotional boundaries. Warriors stabbed the lifeless body with bronze spears while offering taunts that mocked Trojan courage and royal dignity. Dead enemies posed no threat, yet symbolic victories over corpses provided psychological satisfaction that living combat sometimes failed to achieve. Achilles stripped the divine armor from Hector's corpse with hands that trembled slightly at recovering his beloved's equipment. This bronze had protected Patroclus during his final battle. Now it would return to its rightful owner despite the price paid for its recovery. The hero's treatment of Hector's body exceeded acceptable bounds of military conduct even in that brutal age. He pierced the Trojans' ankles with bronze knives and threaded leather thongs through the wounds. The corpse would suffer indignities that violated divine law and human custom. Achilles bound the body to his chariot with knots that sailors used to secure precious cargo during violent storms. Yet this cargo had no value except as an object for displaying contempt toward enemies who had dared to kill his beloved companion. The chariot began its terrible circuit around Troy's ancient walls, while Hector's head bounced against stones that generations of his ancestors had walked. Dust covered the face that had once inspired love in devoted wives and pride in loyal subjects. Divine observers watched this desecration with horror that transcended their usual amusement at mortal folly. Even gods recognized limits that bounded acceptable behavior during warfare. Achilles had crossed lines that threatened cosmic order itself. Apollo protested to Zeus about violations of divine law that demanded immediate correction. The dead deserved respect regardless of the circumstances surrounding their deaths. Proper burial rites honored gods as much as deceased heroes, yet Zeus hesitated to intervene directly in grief that had driven his favorite mortal beyond rational behavior. Divine understanding recognized the psychology that motivated such excessive revenge. Perhaps time would restore Achilles to sanity without cosmic interference. The dragging continued for 11 days while Troy's population watched their greatest defender's humiliation. Women tore their hair and rent their garments in mourning that echoed through the city's narrow streets. Collective grief replaced individual sorrow as a civic obligation. King Priam aged decades during those days of watching his beloved son's corpse suffer posthumous torture. The old king's hair turned white as mountain snow, while his shoulders bent beneath grief that exceeded mortal endurance. Royal dignity crumbled before paternal anguish, yet divine intervention preserved Hector's body from decay and disfigurement despite its brutal treatment. Apollo wrapped the corpse in golden clouds that protected flesh from damage. Death could not mar beauty that gods chose to preserve. The city's grief erupted like floodwaters breaking through dam walls when citizens fully comprehended the extent of their loss. Hector had represented their hope for survival and their pride in Trojan excellence. His death announced approaching doom for every living soul within the walls. Andromache felt her beloved's death before messengers brought official confirmation. Divine intuition warned mortal hearts when cosmic bonds were severed forever. The widow's lament would echo through literature for countless generations. She found herself suddenly alone in a hostile world that offered no protection for women without male guardians. Her infant son faced slavery or death when Greek vengeance finally penetrated Troy's defences. Maternal fears replaced wifely grief as primary concerns. The young widow spoke prophetically of her child's approaching fate. Astyanax would never rule the city his name proclaimed him destined to govern. Greek hatred would not permit Hector's bloodline to survive Troy's destruction. Her words painted vivid pictures of slavery that awaited noble women when their protectors lay dead. Foreign masters would command tasks that royal hands had never performed. Trojan queens would carry water and weave cloth for their conquerors' households. Queen Hecuba added her voice to the chorus of lamentation that rose from palace courtyards like smoke from funeral pyres. She had borne many sons to serve Troy's military needs. Now the best of them lay dead, while lesser men survived. The Queen Mother spoke of her son's essential gentleness despite his reputation as a formidable warrior. Hector had combined martial excellence with kindness that made him beloved by common citizens and palace servants alike. Even Helen contributed her voice to Troy's collective mourning despite the role her beauty had played in causing the war. The son of Priam had never reproached her for the suffering her presence had brought upon his family and city. Her lament revealed genuine affection for the brother-in-law who had treated her with courtesy, while others whispered accusations. Hector had embodied the nobility that made Trojan culture worthy of preservation, despite its inevitable destruction. The city's mourning transcended individual grief to become collective recognition of approaching doom. Citizens understood that their protector's death had sealed their own fates. Divine justice would soon claim everyone who sheltered behind walls that could no longer guarantee safety. Children would grow up as slaves in foreign lands. Women would serve masters who spoke different languages and worshipped alien gods. Men would die defending stones that could not be defended once divine favour had transferred to their enemies. Yet Troy's lament also celebrated the heroic virtues that made its destruction tragic rather than merely inevitable. Hector had embodied courage, loyalty and love that elevated human nature despite its ultimate futility against cosmic will. The hero's death marked the end of an age when individual excellence could challenge divine decree through pure force of noble character. His failure demonstrated that even perfect heroes must yield to destinies that transcended mortal understanding. 12 days passed while Achilles dragged Hector's body around his beloved friend's tomb. Divine protection preserved the corpse from decay, yet the hero's grief remained as fresh as morning dew. No amount of revenge could restore the gentle warrior who had died wearing borrowed armour. The son of Peleus finally turned his attention to honouring Patroclus with funeral rites that befitted the greatest friendship in heroic literature. Death demanded proper ceremony regardless of personal anguish. The living owed appropriate tribute to those who had passed into shadow. Greek warriors gathered timber from Mount Ida's forested slopes while their champion designed a pyre worthy of his beloved companion. The funeral fire would blaze higher than any previously built on Trojan soil. Smoke would carry Patroclus' spirit to whatever realm awaited heroic souls. Massive logs formed the pyre's foundation like the walls of a wooden palace. Pine and oak burned with aromatic smoke that pleased both gods and mortals. The structure rose 100 feet on each side. Its height challenged the towers of Troy itself. Achilles supervised every detail with obsessive attention that revealed his desperate need to honour love that death had severed. The funeral preparations became his final gift to the friend who had shared his thoughts and dreams. Perfect execution demonstrated devotion that words could not express. Animal sacrifices surrounded the pyre with offerings that proclaimed Patroclus' worth to divine observers. Cattle, sheep, and horses died beneath ceremonial knives. Their blood enriched the earth while their flesh would feed the funeral flames. The hero's own horses wept like humans mourning their fallen master. Xanthus and Balius had carried Patroclus into his final battle. Divine intelligence made them comprehend loss that mere animals could never grasp. Even immortal steeds felt grief. Achilles cut his own golden hair to place upon his friend's breast. This ultimate sacrifice symbolized the severing of life's most precious bonds. The locks that had never known scissors fell like autumn leaves upon the corpse. 12 young Trojans would die as funeral offerings to appease Patroclus' ghost. These prisoners had been reserved for this terrible purpose since the day of vengeance began. Human sacrifice satisfied ancient customs that civilized ages would abandon. The Greek army watched these preparations with solemn respect for grief that transcended their understanding. Their champion's love for his fallen friend had reshaped the war's entire course. Such devotion deserved recognition even from those who could not comprehend its depths. Yet the elaborate funeral rites served purposes beyond individual mourning. Collective participation in sacred rituals helped heal wounds that individual combat had opened. Community ceremony restored social bonds that warfare had strained to breaking points. The pyre's construction required cooperation between warriors who had quarrelled over precedence and honour. Common purpose united Greeks who had been divided by their leaders' conflicts. Death reminded all mortals of shared humanity that transcended temporary disputes. Divine observers watched these preparations with approval that honoured proper respect for mortality. Even gods acknowledged that death deserved ceremonial recognition. The funeral rites maintained cosmic order by honouring natural boundaries between life and extinction. Patroclus's pyre burned through the night, while divine winds fanned flames that consumed mortal flesh and worldly possessions. By dawn, only white bones remained among the ashes. The hero's spirit had departed for whatever realm awaited souls of the virtuous dead. Achilles gathered his friends' remains in a golden urn that would preserve them, until his own death united their ashes forever. Divine prophecy had promised that their bones would mingle in shared burial that honoured perfect friendship beyond the grave. The son of Peleus announced funeral games that would channel Greek aggression into peaceful competition. Athletic contests offered warriors opportunities to display excellence without shedding blood. Competition could heal divisions that warfare had created among former allies. Rich prizes awaited winners in events that tested different aspects of heroic capability. Golden tripods and silver cups proclaimed the value placed on athletic achievement. Honour could be won through peaceful excellence as well as military prowess. The chariot race began these elaborate competitions with spectacle that rivaled divine festivals. Bronze-fitted wheels thundered across the plain, while drivers displayed skills that differentiated heroes from ordinary mortals. Speed and courage combined in this most prestigious event. Diomedes took an early lead with horses that had been blessed by Athena herself. Divine favour multiplied natural ability beyond mortal competition, yet the goddess's intervention sparked protests from other competitors who demanded equal treatment. Antilochus employed cunning tactics that nearly caused a dangerous accident when he forced his opponent off the established course. The young driver's competitive spirit exceeded prudent judgment. Victory seemed more important than safety or fair play, yet divine intervention prevented disaster when Apollo steadied the endangered chariot. The gods protected mortals who entertained them through displays of courage and skill. Athletic competitions pleased immortal observers who enjoyed human excellence. Achilles served as judge with fairness that surprised men who knew only his terrible wrath. The grieving hero demonstrated nobility that warfare had temporarily obscured. Peaceful leadership revealed character that combat could not fully express. The boxing match that followed tested endurance as much as strength. Epeius and Euryalus pounded each other with leather-wrapped fists until blood flowed from broken faces. Yet their combat remained friendly despite its violent appearance. Wrestling required different skills than boxing or chariot racing. Ajax and Odysseus grappled with techniques that emphasized leverage over brute force. Intelligence could triumph over strength when properly applied through superior knowledge. The foot race celebrated pure speed that gods had granted to mortal frames. Young warriors displayed the swiftness that made them valuable messengers and scouts. Physical gifts earned recognition equal to martial achievements. Armed combat with sword and spear tested military skills without lethal consequences. Warriors fought with dulled weapons that could cause pain without permanent injury. Competitive aggression found safe outlets through regulated violence. The javelin throw and archery contest required precision that years of practice had developed. Distance and accuracy both mattered in these events. Skill earned recognition regardless of social rank or inherited status. Achilles distributed prizes with generous recognition that honoured participation as much as victory. Bronze tripods, golden cups, and silver bowls rewarded effort rather than mere success. Community healing required inclusion of all worthy competitors. The funeral games restored Greek unity that had been fractured by their leaders' quarrels. Shared competition created bonds that replaced divisions caused by political conflicts. Athletic achievement offered alternatives to military glory. Even losers received consolation prizes that acknowledged their courage in accepting challenges. Honor could be earned through brave attempts as well as successful victories. The hero's generosity demonstrated leadership that inspired rather than commanded. The games concluded with ceremonial feasting that celebrated life despite death's recent presence. Food and wine shared among former rivals created fellowship that would survive their return to separate kingdoms. Community had been restored through collective mourning and celebration. King Priam sat alone in his palace chamber while Troy mourned its greatest defender with lamentations that echoed through the narrow streets. The old king's white hair reflected moonlight streaming through windows that overlooked the plain, where his son's body suffered continued indignities. 11 days had passed since Hector's death transformed the city's confident hope into resigned despair. Daily humiliation of the corpse had broken hearts that 9 years of siege warfare had merely cracked. Divine cruelty exceeded human understanding. The aged monarch spoke to empty air with words that revealed a father's anguish transcending royal dignity. What purpose could God serve through such excessive punishment? His son had died honorably in combat. Further torture served no divine or human purpose. Sleep abandoned eyes that had witnessed too much suffering for mortal endurance. Dreams brought no peace when reality exceeded nightmare's worst possibilities. The king existed in waking torment that made death seem like merciful release. Yet paternal love proved stronger than despair when divine inspiration whispered desperate possibilities into the broken king's receptive heart. Perhaps even Achilles possessed human feelings that might respond to properly presented appeals. Fathers understood grief that consumed other fathers' hearts. Hecuba discovered her husband preparing for a journey that seemed to promise certain death. The queen's protests erupted like volcanic fury that had been contained too long. Would he orphan their surviving children through senseless sacrifice to impossible hope? She reminded Priam of royal obligations that exceeded personal grief. Troy needed its king alive more than it needed one corpse properly buried. His death would complete their enemy's victory while serving no useful purpose. Yet the old king's determination had crystallized beyond rational argument or feminine tears. Divine madness, he claimed, had seized his heart with inspiration that demanded obedience. Zeus himself commanded this desperate mission through dreams too vivid to ignore. Priam ordered his servants to load a wagon with treasures that might purchase mercy from the merciless. Golden cups and silver bowls reflected torchlight like captured stars. These riches represented generations of royal accumulation. 12 fine robes woven by Trojan women would demonstrate the city's cultural achievements. Skilled craftsmanship deserved recognition even from enemies who planned to destroy its creators. Beauty might touch hearts that warfare had hardened beyond normal human feeling. 10 talents of gold would appeal to mercenary instincts that motivated most warriors. Even heroes appreciated wealth that could purchase comfort during peacetime years. Material compensation might succeed where emotional appeals had failed. The old king's hands trembled as he handled each precious object. These treasures had adorned palace ceremonies during Troy's years of prosperity and peace. Now they might purchase one son's burial rites from foreign enemies. Divine inspiration had planted this desperate plan in a father's broken heart. No rational calculation could justify such obvious danger. Yet love transcended logic when grief demanded action, regardless of probable consequences. Zeus observed mortal suffering from his golden throne with paternal compassion that transcended cosmic politics. The king of gods had sons among both armies who fought for conflicting causes. Divine fatherhood created sympathies that pure justice could not contain. The father of gods summoned Hermes with commands that would test divine mercy against heroic fury. The messenger god must guide Priam safely through enemy lines to Achilles' tent. Desperate supplication deserved divine protection during its most vulnerable moments. Hermes accepted this mission with characteristic efficiency that concealed deeper emotions. The guide of souls understood mortal grief through countless encounters with the dead. His duties had taught him compassion for those who faced loss beyond their strength to bear. The god disguised himself as a young Myrmidon warrior returning to camp after scouting duties. This form would arouse no suspicion from guards who expected their comrades to move freely through friendly territory. Divine deception served merciful purposes. Priam encountered his divine guide at the ford where the Scamander River crossed the main road to the Greek encampment. The old king's wagon groaned under treasure that might prove insufficient to purchase mercy from implacable enemies. The false Myrmidon offered assistance that seemed to come from youthful courtesy, rather than divine intervention. He would guide the Trojan king through dangerous territory, where guards might kill foreign visitors without questioning their peaceful intentions. Hermes spoke of Achilles with knowledge that revealed intimate familiarity with the hero's character and recent behavior. The son of Peleus remained dangerous despite his grief, yet he retained nobility that might respond to properly presented appeals. The god described Hector's body with details that surprised the listening king. Divine protection had preserved the corpse from decay and disfigurement. Apollo's intervention had maintained dignity despite brutal treatment. This information kindled hope in Priam's despairing heart. If gods protected his son's flesh from corruption, perhaps they also intended mercy for the living father who sought proper burial rites. Divine concern might extend to grieving families. The journey through Greek territory required careful navigation between guard posts that would challenge suspicious visitors. Hermes led the wagon through shadows and moonlight that concealed their passage from mortal eyes. Sleep settled over Greek sentries like divine blessing that prevented awkward encounters. The god's power ensured safe passage through enemy lines that should have been impregnable to unauthorized visitors. Divine favor protected desperate missions. Old age proved unexpectedly advantageous during this dangerous journey. Guards who glimpsed the travelers assumed that elderly men posed no military threat. Grey hair and bent shoulders suggested harmless intentions that required no violent response. The wagon wheels creaked softly on packed earth, while Trojan treasures shifted with each movement. These riches represented hope rather than mere wealth. They carried a father's love transformed into tangible offerings. Hermes delivered his charge to Achilles' tent with divine efficiency that completed Zeus's merciful command. The god's departure left mortal king facing heroic fury with only human courage and paternal love as protection against possible violence. Achilles sat beside his table picking at food that provided no satisfaction to a heart consumed by grief. Divine armor hung nearby on wooden stands like captured starlight. The hero had completed his vengeance, yet found no peace in victory. Priam entered the tent with dignity that royal blood maintained despite desperate circumstances. The old king moved carefully across earth that belonged to his son's killer. Each step required courage that exceeded anything demanded on battlefields. The Trojan monarch fell at Achilles' feet in supplication that violated every principle of royal pride. Kings did not grovel before their enemies regardless of personal need or family obligation. Yet paternal love transcended political dignity. Priam's words poured forth like water from a spring that had been dammed too long. He spoke of shared fatherhood that created bonds between enemies who had never met in peaceful circumstances. Both men had loved sons more than their own lives. The old king reminded Achilles of aged Peleus, who waited in distant Phthia for a son who would never return home. Divine prophecy had sealed the hero's doom when he chose glory over longevity. 2 fathers would mourn before this war ended. He begged for mercy that acknowledged common humanity beneath the surface differences of nationality and cause. Death made all men equal regardless of their achievements or failures. The grave welcomed heroes and cowards with identical indifference. Achilles felt his heart stirring with emotions that endless revenge had failed to satisfy. Priam's tears reminded him of mortality that even divine blood could not escape. The old king's courage deserved recognition if not necessarily compliance. The son of Peleus remembered his own father's frailty with sudden clarity that pierced the fog of grief and rage. Peleus had aged beyond his years while waiting for news from Troy. Parental love created vulnerabilities that warfare exploited mercilessly. Divine compassion began melting ice that had formed around the hero's heart during days of futile vengeance. Hector's humiliation had not restored Patroclus to life. No amount of cruelty could heal wounds that death had opened. Both men wept together for losses that transcended their temporary enmity. Priam mourned the son whose courage had protected Troy for 9 years. Achilles grieved the friend whose gentleness had balanced his own fierce nature. Shared tears created bonds that warfare had made impossible between living enemies. Death revealed common humanity that political differences had obscured. Grief united fathers and friends across the boundaries of conflicting loyalties. The hero raised his enemy from the dust with hands that had dealt death throughout that terrible day. Royal dignity deserved respect even from victorious opponents. Honor could be acknowledged without compromising military achievement. Achilles looked upon his enemy's father with eyes that finally saw individual humanity rather than abstract opposition. The old king's courage in risking certain death for proper burial rites commanded respect that transcended political boundaries. Priam studied the hero whose fame had reached every corner of the Mediterranean world. Divine beauty remained evident despite grief that had aged the young warrior beyond his mortal years. Gods had crafted this form for purposes that exceeded mere human understanding. They recognized each other as worthy opponents who had been shaped by forces beyond individual control. Destiny had made them enemies, yet character had maintained honor despite the brutalities that warfare demanded from its participants. The hero's voice carried gentleness that his reputation had not suggested possible. He spoke of divine will that governed mortal lives according to patterns that human understanding could barely glimpse. Even gods obeyed cosmic laws that transcended individual preferences. Zeus possessed 2 jars that contained all mortal destinies. One held blessings that made life worth living. The other contained sufferings that tested human endurance beyond normal limits. Divine hands distributed both according to incomprehensible justice. Some mortals received only suffering throughout their brief existences. Others enjoyed pure blessing without experiencing pain that taught wisdom through hard experience. Most received mixed portions that balanced joy against sorrow in measures that gods alone determined. Achilles acknowledged that his own fate had been sealed by divine prophecy and personal choice. Glory required early death as its inevitable price. He had chosen immortal fame over peaceful longevity without fully understanding the cost. The hero agreed to return Hector's body in exchange for appropriate ransom that honored both the dead prince's worth and his killer's generosity. 9 days would be granted for funeral preparations. The truce would permit proper burial rites. Priam's relief flowed like water breaking through dam walls that had contained emotion beyond endurance. His son would receive honors that befitted royal blood and heroic achievement. Divine mercy had answered desperate prayers. They shared food and wine with ceremonial courtesy that transformed enemies into temporary guests. Ancient customs demanded hospitality even between mortal opponents. Civilization's forms maintained dignity despite war's dehumanizing pressures. The old king marveled at divine beauty that remained evident in his son's killer. Gods had shaped this mortal form to inspire awe and desire. Yet grief had added lines that made the hero appear older than his years. Achilles saw noble dignity that royal birth had instilled despite age and suffering. Priam bore losses that would have broken lesser men, yet maintained courage that commanded respect from enemies as well as subjects. Sleep finally claimed both men after food and shared recognition had eased hearts that carried burdens too heavy for individual endurance. Exhaustion provided temporary escape from grief that consciousness made unbearable. Hermes awakened Priam before dawn. Light could reveal his presence to guards who might not understand their leader's mercy. The god guided him safely back to Troy with precious cargo that would restore his son's honor. Priam's wagon rolled through Troy's gates as dawn broke over the ancient city's walls. Citizens who had despaired of ever seeing their defender properly honored rushed into the streets with joy that temporarily overcame their grief. Divine mercy had answered desperate prayers. The funeral preparations began immediately with efforts that consumed the city's remaining resources. Troy would honour its greatest son regardless of the cost in treasures or energy. Proper burial rites mattered more than hoarding wealth that enemies would soon claim anyway. 9 days of mourning had been granted through divine intervention and heroic generosity. The truce would permit ceremonies that celebrated Hector's life, while acknowledging the approaching doom his death had sealed. Love would triumph over despair through collective memory. Women throughout the city contributed their finest garments to adorn the funeral pyre. Silks and precious metals transformed utilitarian wood into a monument worthy of royal blood. Craftsmanship demonstrated devotion that words could not adequately express. The body lay in state within the palace courtyard where citizens could pay their final respects to the prince who had protected their lives and property. Even in death, Hector's face retained nobility that had inspired loyalty throughout his living years. Andromache led the chorus of lamentation with words that would echo through literature for countless generations. Her husband had been father, brother, and lord to a woman who now faced slavery in foreign lands. Personal loss embodied collective tragedy. She spoke of their son's approaching fate with prophetic clarity that pierced hearts already broken by immediate grief. Astyanax would not survive his father's death by many years. Greek vengeance would eliminate Hector's bloodline along with Troy's independence. Hecuba added her maternal voice to the mourning that filled palace chambers with sounds that seemed to come from the underworld itself. She had borne many sons to serve their city's military needs. The best of them had fallen first. Helen's unexpected contribution to the funeral lament surprised those who blamed her beauty for causing their current sufferings. Yet she spoke of genuine affection for the brother-in-law, who had treated her with courtesy, while others whispered accusations. Her words revealed the essential nobility that had made Hector beloved, even by those who had reason to resent his family's hospitality toward the woman whose presence had brought war to their gates. Character had transcended political calculations. The funeral pyre blazed higher than any previously built within Troy's walls. Smoke rose toward heaven like prayers seeking divine attention. The flames consumed mortal flesh, while preserving immortal memory that would survive stone and bronze. Citizens gathered the hero's bones from cooling ashes with reverence that treated each fragment like precious jewels. These remains would rest in a golden urn until Troy's own destruction scattered them, along with all other traces of their civilization. The epic structure came full circle as burial rites concluded the story that had begun with divine anger over funeral honours. Death bookended the narrative that explored human responses to mortality's universal challenge. The Iliad ended where it had begun, with recognition of life's brevity. 3,000 years have passed since Homer first sang the rage of Achilles to audiences gathered around Mediterranean hearths. Yet the Iliad continues to speak to human hearts with urgency that transcends cultural boundaries and historical circumstances. Its themes remain as relevant today as they were in Bronze Age Greece. The epic explores the true cost of honour and glory that heroes pursue through warfare's brutal necessities. Achilles achieves immortal fame but loses everything that made life worth living. His choice between long life and eternal memory reveals tensions that still torment human consciousness. Divine justice operates according to principles that mortal understanding cannot fully grasp. Innocent people suffer while guilty parties escape appropriate punishment. The gods themselves display petty jealousies and cruel indifference that mock human expectations of cosmic fairness. War destroys civilizations with indiscriminate efficiency that spares neither the noble nor the innocent. Troy's cultural achievements cannot preserve it from Greek vengeance. Art, music, and literature provide no defense against bronze spears guided by righteous anger. Yet love proves stronger than hatred when human hearts recognize shared mortality that unites enemies in common fate. Priam and Achilles discover bonds that transcend their temporary enmity. Grief creates understanding that warfare had made impossible. The Iliad's influence on all subsequent Western literature cannot be measured or adequately described. Every epic poem, tragic drama, and heroic narrative owes debts to Homer's foundational masterpiece. The patterns he established continue shaping how we understand conflict and character. Modern readers still find themselves drawn into the world Homer created through language that transforms ancient conflicts into timeless human drama. His characters live and breathe with psychological complexity that makes their Bronze Age setting irrelevant to emotional engagement. We continue reading Homer because his questions remain unanswered despite centuries of human progress. What makes life worth living when death claims everything we value? How should mortals respond to divine indifference or cosmic injustice? Can love survive hatred's destructive power? The Iliad offers no easy answers to the problems that have plagued human existence since consciousness first recognized mortality's universal threat. Yet the epic's greatest gift lies not in solutions, but in the quality of attention it brings to eternal questions. Homer teaches us to see warfare's true face beneath the glory that poets and politicians use to make violence seem noble. He reveals the human cost of political conflicts that destroy individuals for abstract causes. His honesty about war's brutality makes peace more precious. The epic's final scene brings us face to face with our own mortality through the shared grief of enemies who discover their common humanity. Death makes philosophers of kings and heroes alike. In recognizing our limitations, we find our greatest dignity. Homer's gift to human consciousness consists of questions rather than answers, problems rather than solutions. The Iliad continues teaching us to ask better questions about the meanings we create in the face of meaninglessness. This ancient song still guides us toward wisdom that honors both human aspiration and human limitation. As sleep comes gently to close another day's journey through life's challenges, we carry with us the voices of heroes who faced their fates with courage that time cannot diminish. Their stories become part of our own narrative as we struggle to find meaning in mortality's brief span. The Iliad lives because we live, and we live more fully because Homer sang of rage, love, and the glory that survives all temporal things.